Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I never planned on losing sleep that weekend. I just wanted a quiet fishing trip in a small country cabin. The woman who owned the place told me the outside lights sometimes turned on by themselves. She said it like it was nothing, just a quirk of old wiring. I shrugged it off. I only cared about a break from my routine. The idea of sitting by the lake alone with my thoughts sounded perfect, but I didn't expect to wake up night after night with a knot in my stomach. I didn't expect to find footprints where no one should have been walking. And I sure didn't expect to see a figure in dark clothing staring at me from the fence line. I arrived on a Friday afternoon. The cabin sat off a dirt road, next to a patch of tall grass and a shallow creek that led to a bigger lake. The place looked old but clean. It had a porch with a single rocking chair, an old screen door, and a modest interior with basic furniture. A small table, 2 chairs, a couch, and a bed in a tiny bedroom. The owner stood on the porch waiting to hand me the keys. She was in her late 60s, maybe early 70s, wearing a sweater and jeans. She pointed to the motion sensor lights attached above the front door and on the corners of the cabin. She said they flickered on for no reason sometimes, probably because of animals. I just nodded. She gave me a quick smile and said, "Don't worry, it happens once in a while, nothing dangerous." I put my bag down and thanked her. She left in her old pickup, and I went inside. The first evening was quiet. I set my stuff on the bed, looked around for any musty smell, but it seemed fine. The fridge worked. The faucet in the sink dripped a little, but it didn't bother me. I walked outside to check the property. There was a small backyard with a short fence. Beyond that fence, I saw a line of trees. The ground felt damp from rain earlier that week. I stepped in a few muddy spots, but not enough to ruin my shoes. The front yard had gravel where I parked. I took a deep breath of fresh air and felt better than I had in months. That night, I cooked a simple meal on the stovetop and read a magazine on the couch. Around 10, I felt tired. I flipped off the lights and went to bed. I didn't notice anything strange until around 3 in the morning, when the outside light clicked on. It was a dull glow through the curtains. I opened my eyes and listened. Nothing. No wind, no rustling of animals. The silence felt thick. My heart beat a little faster than normal. After about 10 seconds, the light went off. I figured some raccoon or possum had crossed the yard. I tried to go back to sleep and I managed to drift off without much trouble. The second day was peaceful. I woke up early, drove to the lake, and fished for hours. The catch wasn't great, but I enjoyed the calm water. My phone barely had a signal, which I found nice. I sat on my folding chair, cast a few lines, and watched the clouds. Nobody else came around. By late afternoon, I headed back to the cabin. I made myself a sandwich and put on some music from my phone's downloaded playlist. As the sun set, I noticed how the trees behind the fence cast long shadows over the yard. The place took on a quiet mood as evening fell. I went inside, showered, and settled in to watch a movie on my laptop. Around midnight, I saw something move outside the window. It was just a flicker of motion at first. I paused the movie and listened. A few seconds later, that outside light turned on again, lighting up part of the yard. My chest tightened. I stood up, walked over and looked out the window. I was expecting a deer or something. That's when I saw a figure near the back fence. It looked like a woman wearing a long, dark outfit, maybe a dress or coat. She was just standing there, back straight, head tilted slightly toward the cabin. She wasn't very tall, but I couldn't see details, just a shape. My scalp prickled. I blinked and looked again, but the light shut off, and the yard went dark. I flipped the inside light switch to kill the glare on the window, then I rushed outside in my socks. The porch light automatically came on, and I hustled to the fence, calling out, "Hello, ma'am?" There was no response. I looked around, but I only heard my own breathing. I turned in a full circle, scanning the yard. Nothing. No footsteps, no movement. The fence was old but sturdy. I didn't see any gate that was left open. The only noise was my heart pounding in my ears. I stayed out there a minute or so, then went back inside. I felt a cold sweat forming on my forehead. I locked the door and double-checked the windows. Then I sat on the couch, waiting to see if the light would come on again. It didn't. Eventually, I fell asleep out there, uneasy but exhausted. The third night was worse. After another fishing trip that day, I felt a bit restless. I kept thinking about that figure. Maybe it was just a neighbor checking on the place. Maybe someone wandered too close and got embarrassed. Part of me tried to forget it. But around 1 in the morning, I heard footsteps on the front porch. Slow steps, like someone walking from one end to the other. The floorboards creaked in a steady rhythm. One step, pause, another step, pause. I froze in bed, pulling the blanket aside. My arms felt tight, and my stomach sank. My first instinct was to stay quiet. Maybe I should call out. Maybe I should grab a flashlight. Eventually, I got the courage to get up. I slipped out of bed, slid on my shoes without tying them, and crept to the front door. The outside light was still off. The steps had stopped. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I flicked the porch light switch. Nothing happened. The bulb must have burned out, or maybe the motion sensor was acting up again. I unlocked the door and opened it a crack. I peered out. The porch was empty. Nothing but the rocking chair and a couple of spiders on the wood railing. I breathed out slowly. Then I stepped all the way outside, turning my phone's flashlight on. I swept it across the porch and the yard. No one, no sign of movement. The night air felt cold against my face. I listened for any rustling in the grass or the distant crunch of gravel. Total silence. My nerves felt raw. By morning, I found footprints on the porch. They were faint, but they looked odd. The shape was narrow with lines running across the sole. I pressed my foot next to them, and the pattern was different from my modern sneakers. These looked like older, thinner shoes with ridges. They went halfway across the porch, then stopped. There was no trail in the yard, even though the grass was wet with dew. It didn't make sense. I stood there, rubbing my face, trying to figure it out. I took a few pictures with my phone. Then I poured myself some coffee and sat on the porch steps, squinting at the fence line. I didn't see anything unusual during the day, but I felt uneasy the whole time. That night I tried to stay alert. I didn't go to bed early. I kept the living room light off so I could see outside better. I sat in the dark with my phone, occasionally looking through the window, scanning the yard. Around 4 in the morning, the floodlight in the backyard turned on. I jumped and leaned over the back window, pressing my face to the glass. My heart pounded like a drum. I saw a figure near the fence again, the same height and build as before. I couldn't make out a face or hair, just that dark outline. I didn't move for a second. A chill spread through my arms and legs. Then I saw it turn, like it was stepping away. The light clicked off, and the yard went black. I snatched my flashlight and ran out the back door, not even thinking about shoes this time. I took 5 long strides across the yard. My feet got soaked in the wet grass. I pointed my beam around, panting. Nothing was there. I shone the light near the fence, scanning every inch. No one. The cabin door clicked shut behind me in the breeze, and I felt a surge of panic. But I was alone. I breathed through my mouth, my breaths loud in my ears. After a minute, I went back inside, locked the door, and paced around the living room. My hands were shaking. At around 4:30, the same light turned on again. My body tensed, and I rushed to the window. Once more, I caught a glimpse of that shape at the fence before the light went dark. I felt an electric current in my muscles, a wave of adrenaline. I flicked on the back porch light. It lit up a small portion of the yard, but not all the way to the fence. I could see no movement. Yet I felt watched. I yanked the door open and shouted, "Hello? Who's out there?" My own voice sounded strained. No response. I waited in the doorway, my flashlight pointed straight ahead. My breath formed small clouds in the cool air. Finally, I went back inside, slammed the door, and locked it. At 5, the floodlight triggered a third time. This time, I didn't go outside. I just watched from the window. The silhouette stood still, then vanished, like it stepped behind a tree. I felt my skin prickle. The idea of someone lurking back there for hours rattled me. I grabbed a chair from the kitchen and propped it against the door handle, even though it already had a lock and chain. Then I sat at the table, elbows on the surface, my head in my hands. My heart wouldn't slow down. Every small noise made me twitch. I stayed there until the sky started to lighten. Then I dozed off for a few minutes, my head resting on my folded arms. In the morning, I stepped outside, shivering despite the sunlight. I walked to the fence where I'd seen that figure. The grass was flat in places, but there weren't any real footprints, just some random depressions that might have been made by animals. I checked the far side of the fence, walking around through a small gate near the driveway, but I found nothing. No footprints leading away, no sign of a path. It felt surreal, but my gut told me I wasn't imagining it. I spent that last day counting down the hours until I could leave. I hardly ate. I kept glancing at the windows whenever a branch snapped or a gust of wind blew. By evening, I packed my stuff and decided I wouldn't stay another night. I was supposed to stay until Monday, but I couldn't handle it anymore. I left a note for the owner on the kitchen table, explaining I had to go home early. I locked up, loaded my car, and glanced one more time at that fence line. The yard looked empty in the midday sun. Still, my stomach felt tight. I never figured out who or what it was. Maybe someone had a reason for creeping around. Maybe the motion sensor lights were just messed up, and my tired brain filled in the rest. But I know what I saw. A shape in dark clothing that turned to look at me through the darkness. And I know I heard those footsteps on the porch. That weekend started as a simple getaway, but ended up leaving me tense and sleep-deprived. Now every time I see a motion sensor light flick on by itself, I remember that lonely cabin and that silent figure standing by the fence. I knew something was off the second I put my foot inside that house. The front door creaked in a way that didn't sound normal, like it was warning me not to enter. I could smell this stale air mixed with what I can only describe as old wood and dampness. I had just moved in, excited about the idea of living in a historic neighborhood. But the moment I crossed that threshold, my stomach tightened. I told myself it was just first week nerves. But each time I went inside, that heaviness got stronger. I moved here alone. I'm a single guy in my early 30s, and I wanted a place that felt different from the modern apartments I'd lived in before. This old house was built in the early 1900s. It still had original floors and a narrow staircase leading to the second floor. Above that was a small attic, more like a crawl space with a folding ladder. When I first saw the place, I thought the attic would be a good storage spot. I wasn't expecting anything strange. People said old houses have quirks like creaky floors and drafty windows. I figured that was normal. On my first night, after moving in my boxes and pushing furniture around, I felt exhausted. I remember standing in the living room, wiping sweat off my face and noticing how quiet the house was. Outside, I heard a car pass now and then, but inside, everything felt still. I tried to relax, telling myself this was just a new beginning. But I couldn't shake that tight feeling in my chest. Something about the silence wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive, like the house was waiting for something. I decided to sleep on the living room couch that night. I was too tired to set up my bed. Around midnight, I was half asleep, staring at the ceiling. I heard a single thump above me, in the attic area. It was soft, more like a footstep than a random settling of the house. I sat up, holding my breath. I listened for more sounds, but all I heard was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself it was an old house, and old houses make weird noises. The next day, I set up my bedroom on the second floor. I spent most of the afternoon assembling the bed, unpacking clothes, and placing boxes in the attic. The folding ladder screeched whenever I pulled it down, which made me cringe every time. The attic itself was cramped, with an uneven wooden floor. I saw a single overhead light bulb and some random nails sticking out of the beams. I stored a few cardboard boxes and an old trunk up there. The trunk had belonged to my grandfather, and I rarely opened it. I placed it against the corner. I made sure to lock the small latch on the attic door before leaving it. That night I was in bed, scrolling through my phone, trying to unwind. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard it again, footsteps in the attic. They were slow and steady, like someone pacing. The floorboards above me creaked one after another. I got this cold sensation in my stomach and my skin prickled. My immediate thought was, did I leave a window open up there? Maybe an animal got in? I climbed out of bed, grabbed the flashlight from my bedside table, and slipped on some shoes. My palms felt clammy as I reached for the pull cord to open the attic ladder. I paused, listening. The footsteps stopped. The silence was deafening. My heart thumped so hard I could feel it in my neck. I yanked down the ladder and climbed. The wooden steps groaned under my weight. When I reached the attic, I shined the flashlight around. Everything looked the same. My boxes were there. The trunk was closed, and I didn't see any animals. The air felt cold, though. I could see my breath in front of me, like a faint mist. I checked the small window. It was locked. Then I looked at the attic door latch. It was unhooked. I specifically remembered locking that latch earlier in the day, but now it was undone. I felt a chill on the back of my neck. I tried to keep it together, telling myself maybe I forgot. I closed the latch again, then climbed down. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep well for the rest of the night. Over the next few days, I noticed more strange things. The temperature upstairs dropped around 2 a.m, every single night. It was always around that time that I'd wake up with a shiver or see my breath in the air. Sometimes the lights would flicker too, just for a second. It was enough to make me feel on edge. I started leaving the lamp on when I went to sleep, but it didn't help. I kept thinking I heard someone walking above me. One afternoon, I decided to investigate the attic in the daylight, just to put my mind at ease. I climbed up, carrying a small toolbox in case there were any loose boards or faulty wiring. As soon as I got up there, I noticed that the trunk was half open, and several of my boxes had been moved around. Books were scattered on the floor, as if someone had opened the boxes and tossed the contents out. I felt a rush of adrenaline. There was no sign of a break-in. All the windows were shut and locked. I looked for footprints, but the old wooden floor was scuffed in general, so I couldn't see any clear marks. I bent down and picked up some books, my hands shaking. I thought maybe I was losing it, or maybe someone had a spare key and was messing with me. But none of it made sense. That night I tried to stay up late. I wanted to see if I could catch whoever was doing this. I sat in the living room with the lights off, listening. Sometime after midnight, I started dozing off in the chair. The house felt so quiet that my ears were almost ringing. Then, around 2 a.m, the lights flickered. My eyes snapped open, and I felt that familiar cold draft on my arms. I got up, flicked on the flashlight, and headed for the staircase. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I moved quietly, step by step, until I reached the attic ladder. I paused. My breathing was shallow. I pulled the cord, and the ladder unfolded. It creaked, and I froze, listening for movement. The attic door was slightly ajar. I swear I had locked it earlier. I climbed up, each step feeling more unsteady. When my head peeked into the attic space, I saw the trunk wide open this time, and some books spread around the floor again. I swallowed hard. My flashlight beam shook because my hand was trembling. I didn't see anyone, but I felt like I wasn't alone. The air felt heavy. The hair on my arm stood up. I forced myself to step into the attic. The old floorboards groaned, and I could hear my own breathing. I glanced around, checking behind boxes, crawling over to the trunk. Nothing. I touched the trunk's lid and noticed the latch was snapped off. That was new. I couldn't understand how it broke. I tried picking it up, but it was still attached, just bent out of shape. Then I saw my grandfather's old journal sitting on top of some clothes inside the trunk. It was open to a random page. I felt uncomfortable, like someone had gone through it. My mind raced with questions. Was I sleepwalking? Had I done this? I couldn't recall anything like that, but I also couldn't explain how else it was happening. I closed the trunk, pushed the latch down as best I could, and looked around the attic once more. My flashlight cast long shadows across the rafters. The silence was absolute. My legs felt weak. I backed toward the ladder. That's when I heard a soft scraping sound behind me. It was like cloth dragging across wood. I spun around, shining the flashlight. Nothing. I stood frozen for a few seconds, sweat trickling down my temple. Then I heard another scrape, closer to the corner. I inched forward, my heart hammering in my chest. I saw a small piece of fabric stuck on a nail near the corner beam. I couldn't tell if it was from something of mine or if it had been there for decades. I didn't have any memory of leaving fabric there. At that point, I decided I'd had enough for one night. I climbed down, shut the attic door, and sat on my bed, breathing hard. My head throbbed with tension. I tried to think rationally, but nothing made sense. I considered calling the police, but what would I even say? Someone might be in my attic, but they're invisible? That sounded ridiculous. I ended up not sleeping much, pacing around the upstairs hallway until morning. Over the next week, the disturbances continued. Every night at 2, the house got colder. Every night I heard soft footsteps above me, or sometimes just a single creak that sounded like weight shifting on the boards. I found the attic door unlatched a few more times and boxes were moved around. I started feeling exhausted from lack of sleep. My eyes burned. My neck and shoulders felt stiff from tension. Even during the day, I kept checking over my shoulder. I felt uneasy in my own home, like I was intruding on someone else's space. One evening, I invited a friend over, just to have some company. I didn't tell him everything. I just said the old house was giving me the creeps. He showed up with a 6-pack of beer, and we talked about normal stuff: work, news, sports. Around 11 p.m., he looked at me and asked if I was okay. I guess I looked jumpy, constantly glancing up at the ceiling. He left around midnight, and the house fell silent again. I almost begged him to stay, but that would have been too strange. I felt like I had to handle this myself. When 2 in the morning rolled around, I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. The chill swept through the room. My breath turned to fog. Then a soft flicker ran through the light. I stood up, feeling a surge of adrenaline. This time, I decided to push back against the fear. I grabbed my flashlight, marched to the attic ladder, and pulled it down fast. I climbed up, determined not to run. The attic door was partly open again, so I entered. My heart pounded in my ears. Inside, I saw the trunk open once more. The lid was up, and the journal lay beside it. Several pages were flipped as if someone had thumbed through it. I took a step closer, shining the beam on it. Suddenly, a loud creak came from behind me. I spun around, nearly dropping the flashlight. The floorboard dipped as if someone heavy was standing there. I felt a wave of cold air push past me. My whole body broke out in goosebumps. I yelled something like, "Who's there?" My voice sounded shaky. No answer. I checked every corner, behind every box, shining the flashlight across every inch of the space. Nobody was there. But the floor continued to creak a few steps at a time, circling around me. It felt like something was brushing against my arm. I jerked away, stumbling back. I tripped over a box and fell on my side. My pulse raced so fast I thought I might faint. I forced myself up, ignoring the pain in my hip. I turned to run toward the ladder, and right as I reached it, the attic door slammed shut. The sound was deafening in that cramped space. I lunged for the latch, fumbling, pulling it open with a desperate yank. I scrambled down the ladder, nearly losing my footing. Once I was out, I slammed the attic door closed from below and locked it. My hands shook uncontrollably. I staggered back to my bedroom, collapsed against the wall, and tried to steady my breathing. My mind was reeling. I could barely process what I'd just experienced. After that night, I started sleeping on the couch downstairs again. I didn't want to be near the attic. I placed a chair under the folding ladder's cord, thinking maybe that would keep it closed. Each morning, I checked, and the chair was always in the same spot. But every time I opened the attic to check, something had been moved or rummaged through. The trunk stayed open, the journal was flipped around, and random items were scattered on the floor. It was like someone was searching for something, but I had no clue what. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. Even when I was downstairs, I felt that cold weight on my shoulders. Sometimes I'd catch faint noises in the daytime too, but mostly it was at night. I tried to avoid going up there alone, especially in the early hours of the morning. My sleep was broken and my nerves were shot. I felt jumpy at work, constantly checking my phone to see the time, dreading the moment I had to return home. I don't know how long I can keep this up. The strange activity hasn't let up. That oppressive feeling still greets me every time I step inside. The floorboards overhead still creak at odd hours. The temperature drops without warning. And the attic door, no matter how many times I lock it, ends up unlatched. I'm at a point where I'm thinking of moving out. But I just got here. It's supposed to be my home, yet I feel like a trespasser. For now, I do my best to ignore it. I stay downstairs. I keep my phone by my side. I keep a flashlight in every room. I avoid the attic unless absolutely necessary. But every night, at 2 in the morning, the lights flicker and the temperature plunges. And above me, I hear those slow, deliberate footsteps pacing back and forth. I don't know who or what is up there, but it doesn't feel like it wants me gone. It feels like it wants me to know it's still here. I woke up sweating in the dark. My throat felt tight and my chest heaved with each breath. I had no idea what time it was. All I knew was that my pulse hammered in my ears, and I was somewhere I didn't quite trust. I was in the guest room of my friend's old family property, miles away from any city lights or sounds. I had come here to clear my head and relax. Instead, I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling in total darkness, feeling like someone was watching me. My gut clenched. I tried to calm down by inhaling slowly and exhaling through my nose. Nothing helped. The air felt stale. Something was off. I arrived at my friend's place 3 days ago. It's a big house made of old wood and stone. There's a long dirt road that leads from the main gate to the front porch. The fields around the house are quiet, except for crickets at night and the occasional rustle of leaves when the wind picks up. My friend, Mark, inherited the property from his grandparents. He's been fixing it up, but he isn't in a rush. He said he likes the quiet and the space. I thought it sounded like the perfect getaway. My apartment in the city had felt cramped and noisy, so I jumped at the chance to spend a few days here. When I pulled up in my car, Mark was on the porch waving. He had a beer in one hand. He told me to park anywhere. I took my bag and went inside. The house smelled like old wood and dust. The floors creaked in random spots. The walls had some faded pictures of Mark's family, old black and white photos, a few color ones from the 70s, and some more recent shots of Mark's parents. The furniture was mismatched, some modern stuff in the living room, but mostly antiques that belonged to his grandparents. Mark showed me around. He pointed out the kitchen, the dining area, and the main living room with a big fireplace. Then he took me upstairs to the guest room, which was at the end of a hallway. The door was thick and the hinges squeaked when we opened it. Inside there was a queen-sized bed with a wooden frame, a small dresser with chipped paint, and a window that overlooked a stretch of pasture. The walls were plain, with a single frame holding a yellowed photograph of a barn. Mark told me that this was the only guest room with a decent mattress. The others were full of junk. I noticed the old wood floors had a few scratches. When Mark walked across the room, they made a sharp creaking noise under his feet. I unpacked, took a quick shower, and had dinner with Mark in the kitchen. He grilled some meat and roasted vegetables. We drank more beer than we should have, and we ended up talking until late. I felt tired but content. My head was buzzing from the drinks. That first night I slept fine. The sound of the wind in the trees lulled me to sleep. I didn't hear anything strange, and I didn't wake up once. The second day, Mark showed me around the property. We walked through the fields, looked at a small pond, and he pointed out some of the old sheds that had rusted tools inside. He said his grandparents kept livestock here decades ago, but the barns were empty now. The fences were in rough shape. We ate sandwiches for lunch, and then I spent most of the afternoon reading on the porch. Around sunset, the temperature dropped, and a light fog rolled in across the grass. I felt a chill, so I went inside and watched TV while Mark made dinner. We ate in the living room talking about old memories from college. Then, around 10, he said he was wiped out. He showed me where to find some extra blankets for the cold night. Then he went to his room at the other end of the hallway. I stayed up to brush my teeth and wash my face. As I turned off the bathroom light, the hallway seemed darker than the night before. The bulbs were dim. The shadows looked heavier. My steps on the floor made that same creaking sound. I got to my room and shut the door. The click of the latch echoed a bit. I tried to ignore a sudden wave of nerves. I told myself I was being jumpy for no reason. It was just an old house in the countryside. I changed into pajamas, climbed into bed, and pulled the covers over me. It was cold, so I tucked the blanket under my chin. I think I fell asleep fast. The day had been long, and my legs were sore from walking around. But in the middle of the night, something yanked me out of a deep sleep. I can't remember a sound or movement, but my eyes flew open, and I felt alarmed. I stared at the dark ceiling. My heart beat hard in my chest. My arms felt stiff. At first I thought I had that weird sleep paralysis thing people talk about. But then I realized I could move my legs a bit. I tried to raise my arms, and something heavy pressed down on them near my shoulders. I froze. I couldn't see any shape. I couldn't see anything except the outlines of furniture in the faint moonlight. The room was silent. My chest felt crushed, like a weight was on it. My breathing turned shallow. I tried to call out, but my voice came out in a ragged whisper. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. My face was hot, but the rest of me felt cold. The pressure on my arms was so strong that I felt pinned. I jerked to the left, trying to pull myself free, but it was useless. My mind raced. Is there someone in here? Am I imagining this? I heard a soft sound like an exhale, but it felt cold. The air near my face turned icy for a moment. I clenched my teeth. Every hair on my body seemed to stand on end. My heart pounded even harder. I tried to see if there was a person in the room, but it was too dark. I wanted to shout for Mark, but I was so terrified that my throat tightened. I managed to rasp out his name, but it was barely audible. My skin started to prickle with sweat. The cold breath near my face lingered for a few seconds, then vanished. I took a shallow breath. My chest still felt crushed, like a boot was on it. Then I heard a single creak on the floor, like someone took a step backward. Suddenly, the weight lifted off my body. I gasped and tried to scramble upright. My arms were free. The hair on my arms was damp with sweat. I shot upright in bed, my back pressed against the headboard. My heartbeat hammered in my chest. I kept scanning the room, waiting to see a figure or a shape. There was nothing. I stayed like that for a minute or so, breathing fast, searching for any clue. My mind was a mess of questions. Did that just happen? Is someone hiding in the corner? Did Mark come in here for some reason? But the room looked empty, except for the dresser and the chair in the corner. I reached out to the lamp on the nightstand and fumbled to switch it on. When the warm light filled the room, I saw nothing unusual. The door was still shut. The window was closed. I swallowed, trying to steady my breathing. My arms ached near the shoulders, like someone had gripped them hard. I lifted my shirt collar and wiped my forehead. My body was shaking. I slipped out of bed, knees wobbly. I felt a cold draft against my ankles. I inched toward the door. I opened it fast, expecting to see someone in the hallway. It was empty. The hallway lamp cast a weak light. My eyes darted back and forth. No movement, no footsteps. I reached into the hallway, touched the wall, and flipped on the switch that powered the overhead light in the corridor. The old fixture buzzed. It didn't reveal anything except the dusty floorboards. I considered going to Mark's room to wake him up. My heart was still pounding, and I was breathing like I'd run a marathon. But I hesitated. I felt stupid, like maybe it had been a nightmare and I'd just worked myself into a panic. Mark was probably asleep. I decided to check if the front door was locked. I went downstairs, taking each step slowly. The stairs made a dull thump under my feet. When I reached the front door, it was locked from the inside with a deadbolt. All the windows downstairs were shut too. I stayed in the living room for a while, pacing. My hands shook and my stomach felt queasy. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was half awake, half dreaming. But that cold breath against my face had felt real. The pressure on my arms and chest had been so intense. My shoulders still ached. I sat on the couch, turned on a lamp, and just stared at the dark fireplace. Eventually, exhaustion took over. I dozed off in the living room chair, jumping at every small sound. When morning light finally came in through the windows, I felt relief. The sun's rays made everything seem normal. My body still felt stiff and my eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep. I heard Mark's footsteps on the stairs, so I got up and walked into the kitchen. He was making coffee. He looked at me, took one glance at my face, and asked if I had a rough night. I told him I hadn't slept well. I hesitated. Then I admitted that something had happened in that room. I described how I woke up pinned down, how I heard a step on the floor, how the weight vanished. Mark listened with a focused look. He set his coffee mug on the counter and scratched the back of his neck. He told me that, for years, people mentioned hearing steps in that room at night, but he never thought it was serious. He said he sometimes heard footsteps on the floorboards, but he always dismissed it as the house settling or the wind making the walls creak. I started to feel anger welling up. I asked why he didn't warn me. He shrugged and said he never believed anything was actually wrong. He'd never experienced anything like what I described, so he figured it was just old house noises. I started pacing around the kitchen, remembering how helpless I felt. My shoulders were tense. Mark apologized, but he seemed a bit shaken by the intensity of my story. He said I could switch to another room if I wanted, or even crash on the couch. I told him I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. My mind was still racing. We sat down at the table with our coffee. Mark asked me to go through every detail again. I repeated how the pressure felt, how I couldn't move my arms, and how the cold breath came near my face. I told him about that single creak in the floor like a step backward, and how the pressure vanished. I saw Mark's expression tighten. He looked unsettled, though he tried to hide it. He said maybe something in the room had triggered a night terror, or maybe it was a draft causing the cold sensation. I didn't buy that. It felt too real to be a simple dream or breeze. Despite my fear, I decided to stay at least one more night. I wasn't ready to pack up and run. Part of me wanted to see if it would happen again. I spent that day trying to relax. I helped Mark clean out one of the old sheds. We spent hours moving dusty boxes, sorting tools and clearing cobwebs. My arms ached, but I kept busy. I didn't want to stay idle and think about the night before. Mark and I barely spoke about it after breakfast. We stuck to small talk about random stuff, the shape of the shed's roof, a few chores left around the property, and some local gossip he'd heard from the nearest town. That evening we had a simple dinner, some eggs, toast, and bacon. We watched a few episodes of a cooking show on TV. Mark shot me a glance a couple of times, but neither of us brought up the guest room. Finally, I told him I was going to bed. My nerves felt raw, but I didn't want to linger downstairs. He asked if I wanted the spare blankets. I shook my head, said goodnight, and headed upstairs. At the door to the guest room, I paused. The hallway light flickered. I opened the door cautiously and walked in. I left the light on. I moved around the bed, looking at every corner of the room, even under the bed, which felt childish, but I did it anyway. There was nothing unusual, just a slight chill. I shut the window to make sure no draft could sneak in. Then I changed into my pajamas, leaving the overhead light on. I sat on the edge of the bed and took a few deep breaths. My heart was racing. I decided to turn off the light but keep the lamp by the bed on. I got under the covers and lay there on my back, staring at the ceiling. I tried to keep my eyes open for as long as possible, but eventually, sleep overtook me. I had strange dreams I don't remember clearly, but I do know that at some point, I woke up trembling, expecting that invisible pressure again. There was nothing. The room was silent. My heart was pounding, and my body was covered in sweat, but I felt no weight on my chest. I listened for any sound. The only noise was a faint creak somewhere down the hallway, probably Mark getting up to use the bathroom. I stayed awake for an hour before I fell asleep again. When the sun came up, I felt relieved. I grabbed my bag, dressed quickly, and decided it was time to head back to the city. I told Mark I needed to go home for a work thing. He didn't try to stop me, he just said he understood. We said our goodbyes and I drove off, still feeling uneasy. I didn't tell him I might never sleep in that guest room again. As I steered my car onto the main road, I realized my shoulders were still sore where that invisible force had pinned me. I kept rolling my shoulders, feeling the dull ache. I cranked the radio to distract myself. But even with the music on, I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something. I never did. I've been back in the city for a while now, and I still don't have a clear explanation for what happened. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks. Maybe there's something in that house. Either way, I felt helpless in a way I never want to feel again. My friend says the offer still stands if I ever want to visit. I haven't decided if I will, but if I do, I'm not sleeping in that room. I moved into my new condo expecting quiet nights and a fresh start. I had no idea I'd end up obsessing over strange lights and hushed voices. My first week there felt normal enough. I was still surrounded by boxes. I spent most of my time arranging furniture, unwrapping kitchen utensils, and trying to figure out where to hang my pictures. The living room had large windows with thick curtains. They were a neutral color, nothing fancy. I thought they'd match the sofa. They looked harmless. After I'd set up the main furniture, I wanted to take some pictures to show my parents. They live in another state, and I wanted them to see my progress. I snapped a few shots of the living room with my phone. I checked the gallery and saw these big, round spots of light near the curtains. They weren't small specks. They looked like glowing orbs the size of grapefruit. My first reaction was that my phone camera had some dust on it, so I wiped the lens with my shirt. I took more photos and the orbs were still there, always in the same area near the drapes. They floated in different positions, but they stayed in that corner. I felt a small chill, but I brushed it off. I decided it was probably a weird reflection from outside. I didn't have much time to dwell on it. I had a lot to do at work. When I wasn't working, I was unpacking. Every night, I'd make a bit more progress until I could see my living room floor again. Once I had everything in place, I decided I wanted better photos. That was when I noticed the orbs again. They weren't going away. They were so clear in every shot I took from that angle. I moved the curtains aside, but nothing seemed to change. They just kept showing up. I sent the pictures to my brother, who does photography for a living. I expected him to say it was dust particles, lens flare, or some other typical explanation. Instead, he wrote back saying he had no idea what was causing it. He said it didn't look like reflection or lens dust to him. That got my attention. My brother is usually quick to say, "It's just dust," or "It's just a smudge." This time he sounded uncertain. I felt a wave of nervous energy flood my chest. I tried to keep calm. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. I ran a duster all around that corner of the room. I vacuumed. I washed the windows, I wiped the curtains, and I even checked the overhead lighting. I couldn't find anything unusual. I tried taking more photos right after cleaning. The orbs were still there. They almost looked bigger, like they were closer to the lens. That night I sat on my couch scrolling through the pictures. I looked around the room, trying to see if there was something I'd missed. The place felt quiet. The sound of my upstairs neighbor's television drifted through the ceiling. I was about to get ready for bed when I heard what sounded like faint whispers. It came from the window area. At first I thought it was the TV upstairs, but the voices were too soft and too close. It was like a whisper, but I couldn't make out any words. It lasted maybe 10 seconds and then stopped. I stood up, walked over to the window and listened. Nothing. My skin felt prickly, and my stomach turned a bit. I told myself it was just my imagination. Over the next few days, the whispers became more frequent, always in the evening. They were never loud. They sounded low and hushed, like they were trying not to be heard. I tried to ignore it. Sometimes I'd talk out loud to break the tension. I'd say, "It's just the wind," or "Walls are thin, I can probably hear a neighbor." But deep down, it didn't feel like that. One night, I used my phone to record. I stayed quiet near the windows for a minute or two. When I played it back, I heard strange little crackles and faint static. I thought maybe I'd catch a clear whisper, but I only got these odd, garbled noises. It was impossible to make out words. The recording gave me a dull headache, like I was straining to hear something that wasn't there. I showed a friend of mine some of the photos. He told me I was being paranoid, that it was probably just a glare. I invited him over, determined to show him the orbs in person. We sat in the living room. I grabbed my phone and took a few shots. I expected the orbs to appear again, but when I looked at the pictures, they were gone. The entire corner of the room looked normal. He laughed and said, "See, you were freaking out over nothing." I didn't know what to say. I felt embarrassed and confused. I waited until he left, then I tried again by myself. Sure enough, the orbs were back. They were as large as ever, floating around the curtains. That pattern repeated itself. Anytime I tried to show someone else, the photos came out clean. My brother even came by to do a professional check with his camera. He snapped a bunch of shots while I was in the kitchen. He didn't see anything strange in any of his pictures. Then once he left, I tried taking my own pictures, and the orbs were back. My body tensed up. I felt sweat on my forehead, and my hands started shaking. I sat on the couch staring at the pictures on my phone, wondering what was wrong with me or my condo. Another weird thing started happening. At night, the living room lamps would flicker. It wasn't like a normal power surge. It was more like someone was toggling the switch. I checked my breaker box a few times, but everything looked normal. Nothing was tripped. My building had a maintenance team, so I asked them to come up and check the wiring. They told me everything was fine. They flipped the switches on and off, checked the outlets, tested the bulbs, and found nothing unusual. I stood there with them, feeling silly. I said, "They flicker sometimes," but they just nodded politely and said, "Call us if it happens again." It kept happening, but never when I had anyone else there. One evening I was watching a movie, and the light in the hallway started blinking. My heart rate spiked. I got up, walked over, and tried flipping the switch off and on. The flickering continued for a few seconds, then stopped. My phone was on the coffee table, so I didn't get a video of it. By the time I grabbed the phone, everything was calm. I tried to wait with the camera ready, but nothing happened again that night. I started to feel uneasy in my own home. My sleep was restless. I'd wake up multiple times, certain I'd heard footsteps by the window or a faint cough in the living room. I'd walk out there half asleep and find it empty and still. My chest would pound, and I'd feel this tension between my shoulder blades. My back would ache by morning, like I'd been tensing up all night. I kept telling myself I was stressed. Work was busy, and moving to a new place always creates anxiety. But I couldn't ignore those photos. I couldn't ignore the whispers near the window or the flickering lights. One day, I decided to do a thorough inspection of the windows. I turned off the AC and fans in the condo. I wanted absolute silence. It was mid-afternoon on a Saturday. I carefully removed the curtains. I set them aside. I stood on a small stepladder and examined every inch of the window frame, the glass, the seals, and the tracks. Everything looked normal. I tapped on the walls, trying to find any hollow spots or hidden vents. I didn't find anything. Then I rehung the curtains. I took a few photos with the sun shining in. No orbs appeared in the daylight shots. I felt momentary relief. Then later that evening, they came back in full force. That night around 10, I was getting ready to sleep. The living room was dark, but I left a small lamp on. I heard the voices again. This time I stood up and moved closer to the window. The air felt colder near the glass. My skin started to crawl. I held my breath and listened. I heard what sounded like 2 or 3 voices, all speaking very softly. It was like someone was right outside, just a few feet away. I unlatched the window and pulled it open. The voices cut out the moment I slid the glass. I looked outside. The night sky was clear, and I saw some lights from neighboring buildings. There was nothing on the balcony or around my unit. I shut the window. My hands were shaking. I felt lightheaded, like I was about to panic. I went to my bedroom, lay down, and tried to calm myself. My heart thumped in my ears. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, waiting to hear something else. I think I drifted off at some point, but I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of the lamp in the hallway clicking on and off. I jumped out of bed and ran to the switch. It was still in the off position, yet the lamp blinked a few more times before going dark. I shut the bedroom door and tried to breathe slowly. My mouth was dry. I considered staying with a friend for a few nights just to clear my head, but I didn't want to abandon my place. I felt stubborn. This was my condo. I spent a lot of money moving in. I wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't losing it. So, the next morning, I went to the hardware store and got a new lamp, new bulbs, and a different type of surge protector. I replaced everything in the living room and hallway. For a day or two, the flickering stopped and I thought I'd fixed it. But the orbs didn't go away. I tried taking photos in broad daylight, no orbs. Evening shots, orbs. Always near the curtains, always that same corner. I decided to do one more recording of the strange sounds. I set my phone on the windowsill around 8 p.m. The condo was quiet. I walked out of the room for about 15 minutes, trying to give it time to pick up any whispers. When I came back, the phone's screen was off. The battery was dead, even though it had been near 60% when I started recording. That had never happened before. I charged the phone, played the file, and got nothing but static for 3 seconds before it cut off. My stomach sank. I felt angry and scared, like something was messing with me on purpose. I called another friend to come over that night. I didn't want to be alone. We ordered takeout and watched some TV. I tried not to bring up the orbs or the whispers. After a while, I took a few pictures casually, hoping maybe I could catch something with him there. Of course, there was nothing strange in the photos. Everything looked totally normal. I felt my frustration building. I showed him an older photo with the orbs. He said it was probably an editing glitch or a problem with my phone's software. I just nodded. Once he left, I cleaned up and sat on the couch. The place felt heavier somehow. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the fatigue. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. I looked at the curtains and felt a tightness in my chest. I grabbed my phone and took another photo. There they were. Big, glowing orbs right in front of the window. My hands started shaking. I set my phone down and stared at the spot where they appeared. I didn't see anything unusual with my own eyes. My living room was dim but ordinary. I wanted proof. I tried calling my brother on video chat. I pointed the phone at the window, but on the screen everything looked normal. I sent him the photo I'd just taken and he was silent for a moment. Then he said he wished he could explain it, but he had nothing. That unsettled me even more. He told me to keep track of any other strange things and maybe install a security camera facing the window. I agreed, but I never got around to it. I kept postponing the idea, maybe because I didn't want constant surveillance in my own home. The situation stayed the same for several more nights. I heard the voices, saw the flickering lights, and captured the orbs when I was alone. I never got a clear recording of the whispers. All I had were those photos, which only appeared when no one else was present. I felt stuck. I didn't want to move again, and I didn't want to live with this constant unease. I started leaving the TV or the radio on at low volume, hoping to drown out the whispers. Sometimes it helped me sleep better, but every now and then I'd still catch a hint of those low voices near the window. Eventually, I got used to it in a strange way. My brother still has the photos, but he's as clueless as ever about what could be causing them. My lights still flicker occasionally, though not as often. The orbs still show up in my pictures, but only in the evenings, and only when I'm alone. I keep telling myself one day I'll figure it out, but for now I just live with it. I'm not exactly comfortable, but I haven't been harmed or anything like that. There's just this lingering tension in my chest every time the sun goes down. I still hear those whispers, and I still see those flickering lights. I don't know if there's a final answer. But if you ever see me staring at my curtains, gripping my phone, and sweating a little, this is why. I'm still trying to catch whatever these orbs are in a way I can show someone else. Until then, I'll just keep snapping photos and listening to those strange voices near my windows. It's not the new home experience I dreamed of, but it's what I ended up with. And I deal with it one tense evening at a time. I walked into the building that night and saw that figure hunched over the water cooler. It had a thin, stained gown draped over its body. Its shoulders looked stiff, and its arms seemed too pale under the fluorescent light. I thought maybe it was someone lost or confused. I said, "Hey, you all right?" Then it turned. The eyes looked strange, almost reflective. I blinked once, and it was gone. That was my first week in this apartment, and I still feel my stomach twist when I remember it. I bought this place a month ago. The building is old, made of concrete and exposed pipes that run along the ceilings in the hallways. Before they turned it into apartments, it was a rehabilitation clinic. They remodeled the rooms, put in new floors, and tried to make it look modern. Some parts still feel industrial, though. The hallways are wide, and the walls have these metal bars near the floor, probably from the old hospital trolleys or medical carts that used to pass through. The floor near the elevator still has scuff marks that no amount of buffing seems to remove. On that night, I had come home late from work. The elevator was out of service, so I took the stairs up to my floor. I remember being short of breath when I reached the corridor. The overhead lights were flickering a bit. I passed the water cooler and saw someone leaning over it. The gown looked cheap, like the thin cloth garments used in hospitals. It had a few stains near the sides. At first, I thought it was a neighbor wearing some odd nightshirt. I asked if everything was okay. The figure turned. The eyes seemed to reflect the light. It looked unsettling, like an animal's eyes in the dark. My pulse jumped. I let out a quick gasp. I blinked and the corridor was empty. My hands were shaking and I looked around to see if anyone else was in the hallway. Nobody. I went to my door, unlocked it, and went inside. My heart pounded. I tried to calm down, telling myself I was just tired. The next day I woke up feeling tense. I made some coffee and tried to move on. But it lingered in my head. That face, those eyes. I went out in the hallway later that morning to take out some trash. The corridor felt normal. Just an old hallway with peeling paint and that faint smell of disinfectant. I checked around. The water cooler was there, humming quietly. No one else around. I went back to my apartment and decided to let it go. I still had boxes to unpack, and I didn't want to dwell on something that might have been a trick of the light or my own fatigue. A few nights later, I was trying to sleep, but I heard a sound. It was faint, like metal wheels squeaking and rattling against the floor. I opened my eyes, stared at my ceiling, and listened. It sounded like a cart rolling back and forth in the hallway. I checked the time on my phone. 2:37 a.m. I thought maybe someone was moving furniture or cleaning, but it kept going for a few minutes, then stopped abruptly. I felt a chill run down my back. It reminded me of those hospital carts you see in old movies. I couldn't get back to sleep right away. I just lay there, my ears alert for any more noises. The next morning I went downstairs. The elevator was still acting up, so I took the stairs and found the building's caretaker, Mr. R. Ramos, standing in the lobby, fiddling with a tool belt around his waist. He's a middle-aged guy with a rough voice and a permanent scowl. I asked him about the noise. He shrugged and said, We get weird complaints sometimes. People say they hear carts rolling around or footsteps. When we check the cameras, there's nothing. He gave me a look like he was used to these questions. I asked if the building's past had anything to do with it. He just grunted and said, "People love to blame the old clinic. I don't know if that's it, I just know it happens." He went back to adjusting his belt, and I left for work. That night, I got home around 9 p.m. The elevator was finally working. The ride was slow and creaky, and each floor had those dull, flickering lights. I stepped out onto my floor. The air felt colder than usual. My arms got goosebumps, and I could see my breath in front of me for a second. I found it strange because the windows in that hallway are always shut. There's no draft there, at least not that I know of. But it was undeniably chilly. I checked the water cooler, half expecting to see that figure again, but the corridor was empty. I went inside my apartment, locked the door, and tried to wind down. I turned on the TV, ordered some takeout, and kept glancing at the door. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was right outside in the corridor. Around midnight, I decided to go to bed. I brushed my teeth, turned out the lights, and got under the covers. My body felt tense, my stomach knotted. I wondered if I'd hear those metal wheels again. After a couple of hours of tossing and turning, I started to drift off. Then I heard it. The rattling wheels, faint at first, then a little louder. It sounded like it was right outside my door. My chest tightened, and my hands were clammy. I tried to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. I got out of bed, quietly walked to the door, and pressed my ear against it. The sound of wheels rolling slowly was unmistakable. I stood there, heart pounding in my ears, and then everything went silent. I waited a few moments, then opened the door a crack. The hallway light was dim, but I didn't see anyone. I opened the door fully, stepped out with one foot, and looked around. Nothing. No cart, no person, no shape. I checked the water cooler, still and empty. My breath felt shaky. I went back inside and locked the door. I didn't sleep well that night. Over the next week, I kept noticing that the hallway outside my apartment felt colder than the rest of the building. The difference was noticeable. If I walked just a few feet toward the elevator, the temperature would rise back to normal. In front of my door, it felt like standing in front of an open freezer. I kept telling myself maybe the ventilation system was off or there was some draft coming through the old pipes. But I never heard any air blowing. It was just cold. I tried to ask some other tenants about it. Most gave vague answers or brushed me off. A couple of them said they'd heard strange noises at night. One guy in apartment 904 said he heard a woman mumbling in the hallway around 3 a.m. when he went out to smoke. He never saw her, just heard the voice. Then silence. Another tenant mentioned seeing a shape in the hallway, but he thought it was just a reflection. The caretaker, Mr. Ramos, told me that the cameras in the corridors never show anything at night, even when people report seeing someone. He said he's checked them himself and there's never any movement recorded after midnight. He told me to make sure I lock my door, but I got the sense he wasn't talking about intruders in the usual sense. Late one evening, I tried to push the thought of all this out of my head by watching some dumb reality show on TV. I got up for a drink of water, and my lights flickered for a second. That happens occasionally in old buildings, so I didn't make much of it. Then I heard a soft thump on the wall near my front door. I set my glass down and walked over. I pressed my ear against the door. My heart was thudding in my chest. For a second, I heard nothing. Then I heard what sounded like gentle scratching, as if someone was running their nails along the hallway wall. It was a slow, steady sound. My throat went dry. I debated opening the door. Part of me wanted to fling it open and confront whoever was out there. Another part of me was too shaken to move. I ended up standing there, frozen, while the scratching continued. After a few seconds, it stopped abruptly. I waited another minute, then turned the deadbolt and looked out into the hallway. No one was there. The air felt freezing. I checked the water cooler again, the corners of the corridor, even the stairwell entrance. Nothing. When I went back inside, I noticed my arms were covered in goosebumps, and not just from the cold. I decided to document what was happening. I set up my phone on a small tripod in the hallway one afternoon, pointed at my door. I wanted to see if anything showed up at night. I left it plugged in so it could record. The next morning, I checked the footage. It was over 8 hours of an empty hallway. No movement, no sound except the hum of the lights. But I remembered hearing the cartwheels around 2 a.m. I remembered hearing something. It didn't show up on the video. It was as if the hallway was completely still all night. A few nights later, I got back late again. The caretaker was in the lobby and he gave me a look. I nodded and walked over to him. I asked, "Any news?" He said, "You and several others have complained, but there's nothing on the cameras." I asked if there was any record of strange incidents back when it was a rehab clinic. He just shrugged and said they never gave him any records. Then he mentioned that a few other tenants had moved out after complaining of weird things at night. He didn't have details, only that they left soon after their leases ended. It was a Friday night when I heard the loudest noise yet. It started around 1 a.m. A metal squeaking that seemed to come from the far end of the corridor. It got closer, then it stopped near my door. I was lying in bed, breathing fast, feeling sweat on my forehead. Suddenly there was a banging noise like something hitting the wall. I jumped out of bed, pulled on some pants, and rushed to the door. I put my hand on the doorknob, hesitated for a second, and then yanked it open. No one in sight. The hallway light flickered. The water cooler stood still, no sign of anyone. I walked toward the elevator, checking every corner. I heard what sounded like wheels rolling away, but I couldn't see them. I stood there confused, my heart hammering. I felt a rush of cold air again. It sent a chill through my spine. Then everything went quiet. I started sleeping with the TV on just to drown out any noises. I noticed that whenever I left the TV off, I'd hear something within an hour or two. If the TV was on, it masked those distant rattles and squeaks. It felt like a temporary fix, though. During the day, everything felt normal. The corridor was still kind of chilly in front of my door, but at least I didn't hear anything. At night, I dreaded the moment I'd start hearing metal wheels or faint scratching. It made my stomach clench. Sometimes I considered moving out, but I'd just bought the place. I didn't want to throw in the towel without a real explanation. One night, I decided to stay awake until I heard something. I sat on the couch with the TV muted, my phone in my hand, ready to record any noise. It was around 2:15 a.m. when I heard the first squeak. It was soft, then got louder. I started recording on my phone. The sound was definitely coming from the hallway. I got up and walked slowly to the door, my phone pointed in front of me. I opened the door a crack and hit record. The corridor lights were dim. I stuck my phone out to film. I couldn't see anything except the empty hallway, but I heard the squeaking, a steady roll of wheels. My breath caught in my throat. I whispered, "Is anyone out there?" No response. The squeaking went on for a few more seconds, then faded. I looked down at my phone. It was recording audio, but the screen showed only the corridor. Nothing moved. I stepped outside and the cold air hit me hard. I felt my teeth chatter for a moment. I panned the phone around. Nothing. I went back inside and locked the door. When I played the recording the next day, I heard the squeaking for sure. It was faint but clear. Visually, there was nothing in the frame. I showed it to Mr. Ramos downstairs. He rubbed the back of his neck and frowned. He said, "I've heard it myself sometimes. Other people have too. The cameras never catch anything, but at least your phone picked up the sound. I still can't do much about it." I asked if I could review the building security footage for that time. He allowed me to see the feed for my floor. It showed me opening the door, phone in hand, scanning the hallway. It showed me standing there for a while, then going back in. That was it. No sign of any cart or person. Every night now I brace for those noises. Sometimes it's just a faint rattle, sometimes it's louder. Sometimes I swear I see a shape in the corner of my eye near the water cooler, but when I turn, it's gone. I keep telling myself maybe it's a neighbor up late or something mechanical in the building's old structure. But none of that explains the figure I saw leaning over the cooler on my first week here. None of that explains how I blinked and it vanished, or how the caretaker and other residents have seen or heard something similar. The hallway still gets unnaturally cold, especially near my door. My phone recordings pick up faint sounds that come and go like they're on a schedule. I'm still here trying to cope with it. I keep my door locked, I keep the TV on at night, and I try not to linger in the hallways. The caretaker says as long as nobody's getting hurt, there's nothing he can do. The neighbors mostly ignore it or try to laugh it off. But I can't ignore it. I saw that figure. I heard those wheels. I feel the cold seeping through my door at night. I don't know what else to do. For now, I'm just living with it, hoping it's all just some leftover energy from when this place was a clinic, or maybe a strange structural problem that causes temperature drops and odd sounds. But every time I hear the squeaking, my heart races. Every time I step into that hallway and feel the sudden chill, I remember those reflective eyes staring at me for just one moment in the flickering light. I try to shake it off, but it's always there in the back of my mind waiting for the next night to come around, and I know it will. I pulled up to the gate with a heavy feeling in my gut. My mouth felt dry and my hand shook a little on the steering wheel. I had just driven onto my friend's property, and I expected a normal weekend barbecue. Instead, I saw my friend standing near the fence, staring at me like I was some kind of trespasser. They looked confused, like they couldn't believe I was actually there. I parked and stepped out, my legs stiff and a dull ache in my shoulders. That was the moment I realized something was off. They didn't come running to greet me like usual. They stood frozen, waiting for me to speak. I checked the time on my phone. It said Friday, 5:13 p.m. They told me it was Monday. I didn't process that right away. I laughed and said something like, "Very funny, guys." But they didn't smile. They told me they had been calling me nonstop since Friday night, asking where I was, why I wasn't answering, or if something had happened. My phone's battery was still above half, and the date on the lock screen hadn't budged from Friday. I tried to show them. I told them, "Look, it's still Friday." One of them grabbed his own phone, which said Monday. I felt a wave of nausea roll through my stomach. It made no sense. I remembered getting in my car around 2 o'clock Friday afternoon and driving for a couple of hours. That was it. I didn't sleep in a hotel or stop for any extended break. Yet here they were, acting like I had vanished for 3 days. They wanted to know why I hadn't answered their texts or calls. I didn't remember hearing any notifications. I pulled my phone from my pocket and checked my messages. It showed nothing new. Then my friend Frank held out his phone. He had a list of messages he'd sent me. They were all urgent, each more worried than the last. They ranged from Friday night to early Monday morning. I stared at his screen. I couldn't believe it. On his phone, there were at least a dozen messages. There were calls that went straight to voicemail. He and the others even tried contacting the local police to see if there had been any accidents on the highway. I felt my skin get clammy. My stomach tensed. I wanted to explain that I had just seen them a few hours ago in my mind. But I knew that wasn't true. I hadn't seen them because I was supposed to arrive before sunset on Friday. That was the plan. We had texted about it on Thursday night, and I promised to bring some extra drinks and a few folding chairs. I kept replaying my last memory, driving along the main highway, turning onto a secondary road, and then seeing a bright, intense light. I remembered slowing down, thinking there might be a wreck or maybe a truck with its brights on. Then nothing. The next thing I knew, I was pulling up to the fence and seeing them all standing there. They led me inside the house. The place smelled like grilled meat and cold beer, but the mood was tense. The chairs were scattered, and there were dishes stacked on the counter. It looked like they had tried to keep the party going while also worrying about me. Frank told me they had waited until Saturday afternoon, thinking I might have had car trouble. Then Sunday came. They tried contacting my family. They even considered going out to search the roads I usually took. By Sunday night, everyone assumed I was either in serious trouble or had decided to bail without telling anyone. I got a few angry messages from people who thought I was playing some stupid prank. Then Monday morning arrived, and they heard my car engine outside. I remember feeling a strange pressure behind my eyes. It wasn't exactly pain. It was more like a dull, throbbing heaviness. My hands felt weak, and I had to sit down on the couch. The room was bright, and the sunlight through the windows felt invasive. My phone still insisted it was Friday evening. The screen never updated. It was as if time had stopped for me. One of my friends, Carla, said I looked like I hadn't slept all weekend. My hair was messy and my face was covered in stubble. I rubbed my jaw and felt the coarse hairs that had grown out. It made no sense because I had shaved on Friday morning before leaving. That meant at least 2 or 3 days had passed for my beard to get that long. My clothes were wrinkled and my shoes had small scuff marks. I couldn't remember getting them dirty, but they looked beat up. They tried to give me water and some food. My appetite was there, but I was also too nervous to eat much. I forced down a couple of bites of cold chicken and some bread. My throat felt tight, like I had a lump that wouldn't go away. I kept looking at my phone, hoping it would suddenly correct itself. It never did. Eventually, I decided to turn it off. That's when I noticed the battery percentage was still around 50%, which was strange because I'd been on the road for hours, or according to them, missing for days without charging it. The phone should have drained more than that, especially if it had no signal in certain areas. I couldn't make sense of any of it. I tried to recall the entire drive in detail. I told them every step. I left my apartment at about 2:00 p.m. I took the main highway south for around 90 minutes, then turned onto the side road that leads up to this farm. That road winds through some empty fields and a patch of woods before you arrive at the front gate. I remembered it was a sunny afternoon, and I had the window cracked open. I remembered passing a gas station about 30 minutes before turning. I also remembered seeing an old pickup truck at some point. Then I saw a bright light around a bend in the road. It was so intense that it made me squint and slow down. I thought maybe there was an accident or maybe some reflective sign. I put my foot on the brake. After that, I don't remember anything. They asked if I felt fear or if I heard any noise. I didn't. I just remembered the light, then darkness, then arriving here. No gaps, no dreaming, no sense of time passing. Just a jump from one moment to the next. They asked if I felt any injuries. I checked my arms and legs. I had no cuts or bruises. I felt no pain besides the dull throbbing in my head. My clothes weren't torn, and my wallet was still in my back pocket with all my cards and ID. My phone was still in the cup holder when I parked. Everything was normal except for the lost days. Frank pulled me aside and asked if I was on any medication or if I had been drinking. I said no. I had been excited about the weekend, and I don't touch alcohol while driving. I had no medical issues, no history of seizures, nothing that would explain losing consciousness or blacking out. He looked worried but didn't press too hard. The others were talking in low voices, trying to figure out if they should call a doctor or maybe the police. I felt a wave of embarrassment, like I was the center of some bizarre show. I asked them to give me some space so I could sort out my thoughts. I walked outside and leaned against the porch railing. The sky was bright and the sun hurt my eyes. The air smelled like grass and burned wood from the fire pit. I felt a slight breeze on my face. I checked my watch. It showed around 5:15 p.m. I asked Frank for the correct time. He said it was 5:15 p.m. on Monday. My watch was also stuck on Friday. The second hand ticked, but it never moved past that minute. It was like the watch was alive but stuck in a loop. I took it off and tapped it. Nothing changed. I decided to step away from everyone for a moment and walk toward my car. I looked for any sign of damage, like maybe I had run into a ditch or scraped the side. The car looked fine. The tires had a thin coat of dust, but that was normal on that dirt road. I checked the trunk, which had a cooler and some folding chairs. Nothing was out of place. The chairs were still folded, and the cooler was empty as planned. I tried the ignition and the engine started without hesitation. The gas gauge was slightly below half. I remembered filling up near my apartment, so it should have been around 3/4. Maybe I used more fuel than I realized. Maybe I was actually on the road for 3 days. But where did I sleep? Where did I go? After a while, everyone gathered around the table inside. They tried to ask me normal questions about my drive, but I gave the same answers. We all got frustrated. They wanted to believe me, but the facts didn't line up. Some of them suspected I was covering something up or that I was playing a twisted joke. Others looked genuinely scared. They asked if I wanted to go to a hospital. I didn't. I felt mostly okay, just worn out. My eyelids felt heavy and my limbs felt weak. It was like I had done some long hike without resting. My breathing was normal, but I still felt a weight in my chest. I agreed to stay the night at the farm. They insisted they wouldn't let me drive home until I saw a doctor, but I convinced them to wait until the morning. I wanted to rest. I took a quick shower, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw dark circles under my eyes. My face looked older. My beard was thicker than just a day's growth. It was more like 3 days of neglect. I rubbed my neck, feeling the tension in my muscles. It was like I had been carrying something heavy for a long time. They set me up in one of the guest rooms. The mattress was firm and the sheets were cold. I turned off the lights and lay there in the dark. My mind kept replaying the image of that intense light on the road. I tried to think of everything that could explain it. Headlights, some weird reflection, construction equipment. It never matched the memory of that searing brightness. I remembered it felt like it surrounded my car. It wasn't just up ahead. It was all around me. Then blankness. I got up early the next day, Tuesday apparently, and felt a little better after some sleep. Everyone else was still waking up. I checked my phone again. The date and time were still stuck on Friday. It was useless as a clock. The battery was still around the same level, which didn't make sense. I decided to power it on and off one more time. It made no difference. I saw the same lock screen I had seen the afternoon I left. Frank drove me into town and I got some basic tests done at a small clinic. They checked my vitals. Nothing was abnormal except slightly elevated blood pressure. They recommended I see a neurologist, but that would require a trip to a larger city. I decided to wait until I got back home. The rest of the day felt slow and awkward. My friends tried to distract me with normal conversation. They asked if I wanted to help clean up the place or just relax. I ended up hanging around outside, sipping water, and staring at the road where I had entered. I kept expecting some memory to come flooding back. Nothing happened. In the afternoon, I sat with them and looked at the texts and calls again. They showed me the call logs. They had tried to call me at least 10 times. The times were spread across Saturday and Sunday. A few messages were asking if I was lost or stuck somewhere. One was from Sunday night saying they were about to give up and call the police. I had no record of these messages on my phone. It was like the phone never received them. Or it received them, but the date never advanced. I felt queasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened to me out there, something I couldn't explain. I left the farm around dusk. I took the same road back, this time with Frank following in his truck. I drove slowly, looking for any sign of the light or anything unusual. I passed the fields and the patch of woods. I saw a few birds in the sky. I saw the road signs. Nothing stood out. No scorch marks, no debris, no reflectors that might have caused the intense glow. My car felt normal. I got home around 10 that night and the trip was uneventful. It's been a few weeks since that weekend. My phone is now working normally, but I had to reset it to factory settings. My watch started running again as soon as I got back home, but I had to replace the battery to fix the date problem. My friends still talk about those missing days. I have no answers. I haven't regained a single memory of what might have happened between the moment I saw that light and the moment I arrived at the farm. All I have is a thick layer of confusion and the raw anxiety that hits me whenever I think about driving alone. I keep expecting that bright light to appear again, but it never does. I wish I had some kind of resolution, but I don't. I just know I lost 3 days, and no one can tell me where I was or why. That's everything I can share. That's all I remember. I always felt safe in my own space. I liked coming home after a long day, locking my door, and knowing I could turn off the lights without worrying about anything. That changed a few weeks ago. Now, every time I step off the elevator and look down the hall, I feel like I'm not alone. It's a strange feeling I can't shake. I see something out of the corner of my eye, and it feels like a person standing in the darkest corner by the stairs. When I look again, there's no one. It's like my eyes are playing tricks on me, but it keeps happening, and it's starting to mess with my head. I live on the 12th floor of an older building downtown. There's a single hallway for each floor, and it leads to 4 apartments. 1 elevator, 1 set of stairs, and 1 service staircase hidden behind a heavy door at the far end. The lighting is usually dim at night because a few bulbs in the ceiling are burnt out, and the manager hasn't replaced them yet. The walls are gray, and the carpet is dark brown. There isn't much decoration, just a dusty fake plant near the elevator doors. The place feels quiet most nights. I hardly see anyone else unless I'm heading out in the morning. Most people here have regular schedules, and I guess I do too, except for the times I stay out late or come home after seeing a friend or running errands. One night, about 3 weeks ago, I returned from a late dinner. I stepped off the elevator, and the hallway looked normal at first. I noticed the burnt-out bulbs, like always. Then I had this urge to look to my left, toward the service stairwell. There's a spot there where the light doesn't reach. It's just a shadowy corner. That's when I saw this shape, like a person standing there. It wasn't solid or well-defined. It was more like a dark silhouette with no features. I froze for a moment, my heart speeding up. I blinked, and when I looked again, there was nothing. At first, I told myself it was probably my eyes adjusting after stepping out of the brighter elevator. Maybe I was just tired. I shrugged it off. I walked to my door, unlocked it, and went inside. As soon as I locked the door behind me, I felt this deep chill in my back, almost like the hallway's cold air followed me inside. My apartment isn't usually cold. The building's heating works well enough, and it wasn't a chilly night. But I felt goosebumps on my arms and a tightness in my chest. I glanced around my living room, which was dark except for the small light on my stove clock in the kitchen. I stood there for a moment, listening. I heard nothing unusual, just the hum of the refrigerator. I calmed down after a while, then went to bed. The next time it happened was a few nights later. I'd gone out with a coworker for drinks. I came back around midnight, took the elevator to my floor, and stepped out. This time I didn't see anything right away, but I heard something. It was faint. It sounded like slow, weak breathing. I stopped moving and listened. My ears felt sensitive in that silence. It came from the direction of the service stairwell again. I didn't see anyone or anything. The corner was dark, just like before. I almost called out, but I was worried I might sound crazy if someone was actually there. So I just stood there holding my breath, trying to confirm what I was hearing. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then I didn't hear it anymore. I walked toward my door, feeling uneasy. My fingers were shaking as I unlocked it. I felt like something was watching me. I went inside, locked it, and leaned against the door. My mind was racing. I started thinking about who else lives on my floor. There's a couple in 1201 who are older. They usually go to sleep by 9. There's a guy in 1202 who travels a lot, so he's rarely home. And there's me in 1203. The door at the end, 1204, is empty. The building manager told me that unit's been vacant for months. I asked myself if maybe the older couple had some weird visitor. But they seem pretty normal. I couldn't figure it out, so I tried to forget about it. I turned on the TV, tried to watch something silly, and eventually went to bed. My sleep wasn't great, though. I had random dreams about standing in a hallway that kept getting darker. I woke up a few times, sweating, then fell back to sleep. Over the following days, I found myself dreading coming home late. I tried to avoid it. I scheduled errands during the day. I stopped going out for late dinners. If I wanted to meet someone, I'd try to do it earlier so I'd be back home before 10. But life doesn't always fit our plans. One night, I had to work late. By the time I got home, it was almost midnight again. The elevator ride up felt slower than usual. My stomach was tense. I stepped out, and I immediately scanned the hallway. The same corner looked suspicious. I told myself I was just imagining it, but then I heard a soft noise, almost like a muffled gasp. It lasted less than a second. I froze and stared at the corner. I felt my pulse hammering in my neck. I squinted, but I couldn't make out a shape. It was just darkness. Still, I felt watched. I thought about turning around and going back downstairs, but where would I go? It was late, and I needed to sleep. So I forced myself to walk to my door, one step at a time. Each step felt heavier. At one point, I thought I saw movement from that corner, like a slight shift of shadows. I didn't stop to look closely. I just kept walking. I got to my door, unlocked it with shaky hands, and hurried inside. When I shut the door, I exhaled loudly. My shirt was damp around my collar. I felt a chill in my spine again, the same deep cold. I locked the deadbolt and attached the chain. Then I stood there in the dark, trying to regulate my breathing. I felt lightheaded. After a few minutes, I turned on the lights. I walked around my place, checking each room. Everything was normal. The windows were locked. Nothing was out of place. I ended up asking the building's caretaker about it the next day. His name is Jorge. He's an older guy, usually pretty friendly. I caught him in the lobby when I left for work. I said, "Hey, Jorge, anyone weird hanging around the 12th floor at night?" He gave me a puzzled look and said he hadn't seen or heard anything. I asked if maybe there was a tenant who worked late shifts or something. He said no. He even checked his list of residents, and everything seemed normal. I described the faint breathing and the weird silhouette, but I felt silly doing it. He listened politely but didn't have any explanation. He just said he'd keep an eye on things. I nodded and left, feeling a bit stupid for asking about it. But I hoped maybe he'd figure it out, or at least confirm I wasn't losing it. A few more nights passed, and nothing happened. I started thinking maybe it was my imagination, or maybe it was a random guest who'd come and gone. Then one evening I was in my apartment around 9. I was watching a show, not really paying attention. I decided to take the trash out. I grabbed the bag, stepped into the hallway, and locked my door behind me. It was quiet. The lights were a bit brighter because someone had replaced at least one bulb. The corner by the service stairs was still darker than the rest, but I could see a little better. I walked toward the elevator, and as I passed that corner, I felt this rush of cold air on my right side. It felt like standing next to an open freezer. Then I heard the same faint breathing, right next to me. I spun around so fast that I almost lost my balance. I saw nothing there, just the dusty carpet and the closed stairwell door. My heart pounded. I took a couple steps back, staring at the corner. No movement, no sound. But my skin was covered in goosebumps. My scalp tingled. I swear I felt the hair on my arm standing up. I hustled to the elevator, pressed the button, and tried to ignore the sense that something was right behind me. When I got back upstairs after dumping my trash, I felt that same heavy tension. I looked at the corner again, but it was empty. I walked to my door, forcing myself not to look back. I told myself out loud that I was just tired. I said, "There's nothing there," like I was scolding my own brain. But I couldn't shake the tightness in my chest. I stayed up late that night, pacing in my living room, checking the peephole of my door every so often. I didn't hear anything else, and eventually, I went to bed. In the days that followed, I tried to talk myself into being more rational. I considered seeing a doctor or talking to a friend about stress. Work had been busy, and I'd been skipping proper meals and not sleeping well. That kind of thing can mess with your head, but the problem is, the sounds and sensations kept happening. It wasn't every single night, but often enough to make me anxious. Sometimes, while waiting for the elevator, I'd hear a faint rasp of breath coming from the service stairwell door. Sometimes I'd step off the elevator late at night and see a flicker of motion in that corner. One time I smelled a strange odor, like damp concrete or old sweat, but I couldn't pinpoint its source. Whenever I went into my apartment, I felt that strange chill in my walls, like the cold was creeping through the paint. I approached Jorge again. I asked him if he'd found anything. He said he'd checked the security cameras in the elevator and the main hallway on the first floor, but there aren't any cameras on the individual floors, so he couldn't see much. He said everything downstairs was normal. He hadn't found any sign of break-ins or unauthorized visitors. No one else had reported anything odd. I pressed him about the empty unit 1204, but he said it was still vacant. No one had entered it, as far as he knew. He even offered to unlock it so we could take a look. I accepted. One afternoon, we opened the door and looked inside. The apartment was empty, with bare floors and a faint, musty smell. Nothing unusual. We locked it again. Jorge just shrugged and said maybe I was tired. I could see in his eyes that he was trying to be helpful, but he was out of ideas. Around a week ago, I decided I couldn't keep living in this constant dread. I didn't want to move out because I actually liked the location, and I don't want the hassle of finding a new place, but I needed to do something. So I set up a small camera on a shelf near my door inside my apartment. I wanted to see if I caught anything when I came in at night. The first few nights, I got nothing. Just me, walking in, looking nervous. But on the fourth night, I came in around 11. I watched the footage back. The hallway was dim behind me as I opened my door. Nothing unusual. But as soon as I stepped inside and turned around to close the door, the camera's audio picked up a soft, raspy sound. It was less than a second long, like a short breath or a whisper. It's faint, but I can hear it. The hair on my arm stood up when I played it back. I showed it to a friend the next day, and he said it sounded like a breeze or maybe feedback from the camera's microphone. He didn't think it was a big deal, but I know what I heard. Now, every night, I walk from the elevator to my door with my keys ready, heart pounding, trying not to look at that corner. Sometimes I still catch a hint of that shape in the darkness. Sometimes I think I hear that weak breathing. I feel the cold on the back of my neck. The moment I get inside, I lock everything up. My place still feels chilly sometimes, like the walls are holding some kind of cold air. I haven't found any cracks or drafts. The maintenance guy says everything looks fine. I try to carry on with my life. I watch movies, I cook, I sleep. But in the back of my mind, I'm always waiting for the next time I sense that presence. I've thought about running down the hallway to the service stairwell door, just to yank it open and see if someone's hiding there. But every time I'm in that hallway, fear takes over, and I can't bring myself to do it. The idea of pulling that door open and facing whoever or whatever might be there makes me sweat. I don't want to confront something I don't understand. Maybe it's just an overactive imagination. Maybe it's something else. I don't know. I haven't seen any real physical evidence. Nothing's been stolen or moved. I've never seen a clear figure in the light. It's always that corner in the dark. It's always that quiet breathing. It's always that cold feeling in my apartment. Jorge says he'll keep an eye on it, but so far nothing's changed. At this point, I'm just trying to get through my days without letting this drive me crazy. I don't want to sound paranoid, but I don't feel comfortable in my own building after midnight. I keep telling myself that if I ignore it, it will go away. But it hasn't gone away yet. It's right there, in the corner of my eye, breathing quietly, reminding me that I might not be alone. I have no idea how to handle it. For now, I stay quiet, stay alert, and try not to blink when I walk through that hallway at night. Because every time I blink, that shape disappears. And every time it disappears, I feel that chill digging into my spine, like the walls themselves are breathing. I'm still here. I'm still waiting for it to stop. But every night, it's the same thing. That dark corner, that faint breath, and my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. I never expected to feel so uneasy in my own house. The first time I heard that muffled voice above my bedroom, I thought I was imagining things. But it happened again the next night, and then again the night after. My house is a 2-story row house with shared walls. There's no attic or hidden crawl space above my bedroom. There shouldn't be anything up there besides the roof. Yet there was a voice, low and steady, speaking words I could barely make out. That's how all this started, and I haven't been able to rest well since. I remember the first night clearly. I was lying in bed checking messages on my phone when I heard it. It was close to midnight. My window was shut, and the lights were off. The sound was so faint I almost missed it. At first it resembled a quiet radio in another room, but it was right above me. The ceiling fan was off, so I knew it wasn't mechanical noise. It was definitely a voice. I leaned up in bed, straining my ears. The voice had a calm tone, but I could pick up a certain intensity. It reminded me of someone trying to make a point without raising their voice too much. I turned off my phone's screen and held my breath, hoping to hear more. There was a short pause, then a few more words. I couldn't make out details, but it felt intentional, like the person was talking to me or about me. My pulse sped up. My hands were sweaty. I didn't feel safe. I switched on the lamp by my bed. The second I did that, the voice stopped. I stayed still for a few minutes, listening, but it didn't come back. I got up, walked to the middle of the room, and tilted my head up. Nothing. The air felt normal. The house wasn't cold. I told myself I was probably tired, but that nagging doubt stuck in my mind. I decided to ignore it for the night and went to bed. The next day, I got home from work around 7 in the evening. My neighbor Alex was just getting out of his car. We share a driveway, so we see each other often enough. I waved him over and asked if he'd heard anything weird at night. He looked at me like I was overthinking. He shrugged and said, "I sleep like a rock. Haven't noticed a thing." Then he went inside. I didn't sense any deception in his voice. He seemed clueless. I told myself that maybe I'd had some odd dream, but I couldn't shake that uneasy feeling. That night I was on edge. I took a hot shower, made something simple for dinner, and tried to watch a movie. At around 11:30, I turned off the TV and headed upstairs to my bedroom. I lay there, listening to the hum of the neighborhood. Sometimes you can hear a distant dog barking or a car passing by, but there was nothing like that. The streets were quiet. That's when I heard the voice again. Low, firm, and right above me. My heart thumped. I got out of bed slowly, not wanting to make noise. The voice continued with short bursts of speech. It was so muffled I couldn't pick up full sentences, but the rhythm of it sounded almost like scolding or giving instructions. I didn't want to turn on any light, so I crawled onto a chair near my closet, trying to get close to the ceiling. I wanted to pinpoint the direction, but the moment I reached up, the voice went silent. It was instantaneous, like someone flipped a switch. My chest felt tight. I waited up there on the chair for a minute or two. No return. I climbed down, turned on my bedside lamp, and just stood staring at the ceiling. I had this dull ache in my stomach. Something about hearing your name in a whispered tone makes your skin crawl, and I thought I heard my name. It was faint, but it felt directed at me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. My thoughts were racing with no real plan. I walked out to the hallway, stepped carefully into the spare room next to mine, and pressed my ear against the wall. Nothing. I walked into the bathroom across the hall, turned off the light, and listened. Nothing. I crept down the stairs, then out to my backyard and looked up at the roof. I couldn't see any signs of entry. There's just the usual vents and the gutter. No open spaces, no hatch. I felt exposed standing out there in the dark, so I went back inside and locked the door. I told myself to check the roof in the morning. Maybe there was some kind of vent or gap I hadn't noticed. I returned to bed. The rest of the night was quiet, but I barely slept. In the morning, I called in late to work. I needed to see if there was something physically wrong with my house. I grabbed a ladder from the garage, set it up in the backyard, and climbed onto the roof. The sky was bright, and I could see everything clearly. I walked around, checking the shingles, looking for any hatch or covered opening. There was nothing but the usual construction. Our row houses are designed almost identically. I peeked over to my neighbor's side. Same layout, same vents. I didn't see any suspicious wires, loose boards, or hidden access points. After a while, I gave up. I felt frustrated. but I had no evidence of anything. I went to work, tried to focus on my tasks, and stayed late to keep my mind off things. By the time I got home, it was dark. I considered asking Alex to let me check his side of the roof, but I didn't want to sound paranoid. I ended up making a sandwich for dinner, then heading upstairs. That night, the voice returned around midnight. It was clearer than before, at least to me. I was sitting in bed with the lamp on when it started, a subtle murmur drifting from the ceiling. I turned off the lamp, hoping the darkness would let me hear better. I couldn't make out full words, but I sensed a sort of urgency, like the speaker was trying to pass a message. I stayed perfectly still, my hands gripping the sheets. The voice was steady, pausing here and there. I felt my jaw clench. My breathing was shallow. I decided to test something. I moved slowly to the edge of the bed, got on my knees, and began crawling toward a chair in the corner. Every inch felt like a mile. The voice kept going. I reached the chair, stood on it gently, and placed my ear against the ceiling. Dead silence. Again it cut off the second I tried to listen more closely. My arms were trembling, not just from the physical effort of balancing, but from the way my body reacted to the situation. A tightness coiled in my chest. I climbed down, switched on the lamp, and tossed the chair aside in frustration. I stood there, breathing hard. The voice didn't come back. The next day, I confronted Alex. I waited until evening and knocked on his door. When he answered, I could see he was in the middle of dinner, but he invited me in. We sat at his kitchen table and I described everything. He was polite, but I could sense he was skeptical. He said he had no clue why I would hear a voice. According to him, his attic space was sealed just like mine. He'd never installed anything up there. When I asked if we could check, he said there wasn't much to see, just insulation and some structural beams. He agreed to let me have a look, but only in the morning, because he was busy that night. I went back to my place. I felt a small bit of relief that Alex was willing to help. Maybe there was some weird vent that carried noise. Maybe it was traveling from a distant room, bouncing around and ending up above my bedroom. But that didn't explain why I thought I heard my name. And it didn't explain why the sound cut off so abruptly whenever I moved to investigate. That night, I kept a flashlight on my nightstand. I also grabbed a digital recorder I used for work interviews. I set the device on my dresser, hit record, and left it there. Then I turned off the lights and climbed into bed. My plan was to pretend to be asleep and see if the recorder would capture anything. If I heard the voice, I would wait a minute before moving. Around 1 a.m, I heard it again. My heart jumped. I glanced at the recorder's tiny red light. It was still recording. The voice had that same tone, steady, quiet, but insistent. I lay there counting in my head, giving it time. 30 seconds, then a minute. My chest felt tight. My hands were clammy. I was scared to move. Finally, I reached out slowly, grabbed the flashlight, and clicked it on, shining it at the ceiling. Silence. Again, the voice stopped as soon as I did anything. I felt a rush of frustration. The abrupt silence felt almost hostile. I got up, clicked off the recorder, and didn't know what else to do. I sat on the floor for a while, staring at my bedroom door, my thoughts scattered. The next morning, I took the recorder downstairs. I played the file back. For the first hour, it was just ambient noise. Around the 1 hour mark, I heard it. A soft, distant murmur. It was almost impossible to make out words, but it was definitely a voice. My name might have been in there. It was so unclear, but my brain latched onto that possibility. I felt an icy jolt in my stomach. I went to talk to Alex. He let me climb into his tiny attic space. We used a flashlight to inspect every corner. The place was cramped, hot, and dusty. There was no hidden room. There was no walkway leading over my bedroom. We spent about half an hour moving boxes, shining the light into tight spaces. Nothing suggested someone had been there or that there was a secret entrance. We climbed back down, and Alex patted me on the back, telling me to take it easy. That didn't help. I felt even more confused. I decided to call a local contractor I know. He does home inspections. I told him I needed someone to check for structural issues or anything that might cause strange sounds. He came by in the afternoon, went into my crawl space, tapped around the walls, climbed onto the roof, checked the vents, and found nothing. According to him, everything was normal. He said sometimes pipes can rattle, or the wind can cause weird echoes, but that he saw no signs of damage. That night, I forced myself to stay awake as long as I could. I had a baseball bat with me, like that would do any good against a voice. Around midnight, I heard it again, low and distinct. I froze. My ears felt hot. My pulse was pounding in my head. I whispered back, "Hello?" and waited. Nothing changed. The voice didn't respond. It just carried on, like it was in a one-sided conversation. I stood up, holding the bat, and shouted, "Who's there?" The voice stopped. Complete silence. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I climbed onto the bed, swung the bat gently against the ceiling in a few spots, and then pressed my hand against the drywall. It was solid. No hollow gaps, no echoes. My shoulders were tense and my breathing was ragged. I slid down onto the bed, feeling completely out of answers. I wish I could end this story with a neat conclusion, but the voice still appears some nights. Some weeks it's quiet, and I manage to get decent sleep. Other times, like last night, it starts up around midnight and goes on for several minutes. I still haven't figured out what triggers it. Nothing in the house has changed. No new remodeling. No new tenants next door. Alex doesn't hear it on his side. There's no proof that anyone's up there. Yet the voice keeps coming back. It never sounds angry or sad. It just sounds focused, like it's delivering a message to someone. And sometimes, in the middle of those whispered words, I hear something that could be my name. I can't be sure, but it feels personal, and it sets my nerves on edge every time. I've considered moving. I've even considered tearing down part of my ceiling just to see what's there. But then I think about how every professional check has come up empty. The only evidence I have is that recorder file, and it's so muffled that people who hear it say it could be anything: a radio, a passing car, or even interference. They don't feel what I feel when it's happening live. They don't feel the way my skin tingles or my chest tightens when I hear that voice drifting through the ceiling. They don't get the sense that whoever's speaking knows I'm listening. So I stay here, in the same house, waiting for the voice to show itself or disappear forever. I don't know if it's a trick of acoustics or if there's something else going on. I just know that whenever I try to confront it, it goes silent. And whenever I try to ignore it, I swear I hear my name. I've stopped telling friends and coworkers about it. They look at me like I'm losing my grip. But I know what I hear. And I know it's coming from right above my bedroom. That's the most unsettling part. There's nothing up there but a roof and empty air. Yet every so often in the middle of the night, I'm reminded that something, or someone, is right there, speaking in a low, urgent whisper that I can't understand and can't block out. And for now, that's my reality. I heard a strange noise on my way to the bathroom one night, and it stopped me cold in the hallway. It was just a soft click, like metal against wood. At first I thought it came from the ceiling or maybe from one of the door hinges, but my eyes landed on the big mirror on the wall. I had walked past it hundreds of times before without a second thought. That night, something felt different. I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection, and my body froze. It looked like my head had turned a fraction slower than I remembered turning it. I stood there, heart pounding, unsure if I had imagined it. That moment pulled me in. I couldn't just walk away. I've lived in this apartment for almost 6 months. The mirror was already mounted on a wooden panel when I moved in. The panel covers almost the entire length of the corridor wall. It's heavy and seems permanently attached. The screws are hidden behind the mirror's frame. The day I signed the lease, I asked the landlord about it, and he just shrugged. He said the old tenant left it, and removing it would require tearing out part of the wall. So I left it alone. I never cared much about the mirror. It was convenient for checking my shirt before I headed out, but that was it. Until that night, I kept looking at the reflection. My chest felt tight. My mouth went dry, and I stood there in my boxers, trying to catch any sign of delay in my movements. I lifted my right arm, and it moved perfectly in sync with the reflection. I tilted my head, and my reflection tilted its head at the same time. It seemed normal. Maybe I was tired. I glanced at my phone. It was around 2 a.m. I told myself I was half asleep. Then, as I turned to leave, I noticed a tiny lag again. It was so slight that I almost doubted myself. My reflection's hand seemed to follow a beat too late. My stomach lurched. I felt my heart thudding and a chill spread across my back. I stayed there longer than I intended. I waved my arm slowly, and I saw no delay. I took a step backward, still no delay. I leaned to one side, then to the other. Everything looked fine, except for those tiny moments that felt off. I tried quick head turns. 1 out of 5 times, the reflection seemed to pause an extra half second. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt sweat forming on my palms. I reached out and touched the surface of the mirror. It felt like cold glass. I heard no hollow sound behind it, just the gentle tapping of my fingernails against the surface. I thought I might just be exhausted, so I eventually forced myself to go to the bathroom and then headed to bed. The entire time, I couldn't shake the tension in my shoulders. My thoughts raced. Did I really see a delay, or was I imagining it? In bed, I stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I couldn't fall asleep for an hour. I kept picturing that half-second lag. I felt silly. Part of me wanted to get up and check the mirror again. Another part of me was too uneasy to do it. I fell asleep eventually, though it wasn't restful. The next day, I tried to brush it off. I was busy with work. I have a small home office. The mirror is just outside my office door, so each time I stepped out for a glass of water or to use the bathroom, I glanced at the reflection. In daylight, everything seemed normal. I even made a point of standing there, raising my arms, turning my head, blinking my eyes. It all matched perfectly. No weird delay, no strange timing. By noon, I felt calmer. I told myself it was probably just my eyes playing tricks in low light. I went about my day, answered emails, made calls, cooked lunch. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't fully relax. I kept thinking about it. That evening, I decided to do a more deliberate test. I waited until it got dark. I turned on the hallway light and stood in front of the mirror. I repeated the same motions, slow waves, quick turns, even a jump. It was all in sync. I felt relief. I thought, okay, maybe last night was just a random glitch in my tired brain. I turned off the hallway light, leaving only the glow from the living room lamp behind me. My reflection was dimmer. My face was in partial shadow. I breathed slowly. I raised my hand. It matched. Then just as I started to drop my arm, I saw the reflection linger for a split second before following. My chest went tight again. I flipped the hallway light on in a panic. My reflection snapped into place, perfectly mirroring my gestures once more. I stood there, my heart pounding. It wasn't my imagination. Something was off. My first instinct was to rip the mirror off the wall. I went to my toolbox and looked for a screwdriver. The mirror's frame is sealed at the edges, and I couldn't see any obvious place to pry. The wooden panel behind it is large and looks custom fit. I realized it wouldn't be a simple task. I'd have to remove the entire panel to get the mirror off, and that might involve drilling or prying the wood away. My apartment's walls aren't the most solid, and I didn't want to risk damaging the whole corridor. It felt like a big job for one person. I imagined exposing a nasty hole or discovering mold or something else behind there. My gut churned at the thought of dealing with that alone at night. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal. I went out with friends, watched TV, did my usual routine, but I kept testing the mirror in private. Most of the time, the reflection was perfect. Then there were those brief disturbing moments when I'd see a delay. It wasn't consistent. Sometimes I'd see it 2 nights in a row. Sometimes it wouldn't happen for a few days. One time, I swear I saw my reflection grin while my face was neutral. I was sure of it. I remember blinking in confusion. When I looked again, the reflection had my same blank expression. I felt a spike of adrenaline shoot through my veins. My entire body tensed and my mouth went dry. I stood there, feeling my heart thump. Then I fled to the living room and didn't go back near the mirror until the next morning. I started checking the edges of the panel, tapping them to see if there was a hollow space behind the wood. The knocking sound was solid in some parts but sounded more open in others. I got a small flashlight and tried to shine it behind the mirror's frame, but the gap was too narrow. I couldn't see more than a fraction of an inch. All I got was a glimpse of the wall behind it, and it looked plain. Nothing unusual. But something about that panel felt wrong to me. I imagined wires or some device that might be causing the reflection to appear delayed, like a camera or a screen. It sounded absurd, but I didn't have any logical explanation. At night, I started leaving more lights on. I didn't like walking through the hallway in the dark. The mirror's surface was always there, and I couldn't avoid seeing my reflection if I passed by. Sometimes I would rush by without looking, but curiosity would usually make me glance. The tension in my stomach always returned. My body would feel stiff. My breathing would get shallow. My feet would feel rooted to the spot if I caught even the slightest delay. My reflection's eyes might blink just a hair too late, or its head would shift a moment after mine. Each time it happened, my pulse hammered in my ears. I felt sweat on my forehead or on my palms. I started sleeping worse. I had dreams about standing in front of the mirror, watching myself move, waiting to see if the reflection would smile or wink on its own. I'd wake up with my heart racing, then lie in bed listening for any sound from the hallway. My apartment felt less like a comfortable place and more like a trap. I kept thinking about that mirror, about the possibility that something was behind it, but I felt scared to tear it off and find out. I told a friend about the mirror, vaguely, but I didn't mention the delay. I just said it looked old and was firmly attached. My friend joked that maybe there was treasure behind it or a secret room. I laughed it off, but inside I felt uneasy. I started avoiding the corridor at night unless I really had to use the bathroom. I'd often hang out in the living room until I was sure I was ready to sleep, then walk straight to my bedroom without looking at the mirror. But it was impossible not to sense it in my peripheral vision. Sometimes I heard little pops or creaks from that area, but apartments make noises. I tried not to read too much into it, yet every small sound put me on edge, especially in the dark. My heart would spike, and I'd take a deep breath, telling myself it was just wood expanding or something harmless. One night around midnight, I got up to get water. The hallway light was off, and the living room lamp cast enough glow to see the outline of the mirror. I felt a jolt of anxiety. I tried to ignore it. As I walked, I kept my gaze on the floor, but something compelled me to look at the reflection once I was in front of it. I glanced up, and I froze. My reflection's head was tilted slightly to the side as if it was watching me with interest. My own head was level. I swallowed hard. My mind went blank with fear. My body felt heavy. Then, in the next blink, the reflection's head straightened, matching mine. My heart pounded. I couldn't move for a few seconds. My eyes stung from not blinking. Finally, I forced my legs to move toward the kitchen, gripping my phone so hard my knuckles hurt. I didn't look back at the mirror. I stood in the kitchen trying to calm my breathing. My hands were shaking. I told myself it had to be an illusion. Maybe I turned my head slightly, and I didn't realize it. My chest felt tight, and my pulse wouldn't slow down. I drank some water and forced myself to go back to bed. That was the moment I decided I had to deal with it. The next morning, I grabbed a crowbar from a hardware store. I planned to pry the wooden panel off, or at least loosen it enough to see behind the mirror. I wanted to do it in daylight. Around 10 a.m., I stood in the hallway with the crowbar in hand, but my stomach was churning. My forehead was damp with sweat. I kept looking at my reflection. It looked normal in the daylight. I pressed the tip of the crowbar against the edge of the panel and applied pressure. The wood didn't budge. I tried a different corner. It was nailed down or glued. I was afraid of damaging the wall or causing a lot of noise. My neighbors might complain if I started banging away. I stood there, feeling frustrated and uneasy. I was desperate to see behind it, but I wasn't sure how far I wanted to go. What if I discovered something worse? I ended up stopping. I put the crowbar aside and just stared at the mirror. My reflection stared back, matching my expression exactly. No delay, no strange tilt of the head. My heart was still hammering from the attempt. I took a deep breath and wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans. I felt weak. I decided I'd call a professional, or maybe talk to the landlord about having it removed properly. I just couldn't keep living with that thing on my wall. It felt like a threat. I don't even know if threat is the right word, but it made me uneasy in a way I can't handle anymore. So that's where things stand now. I still see those flickers of delay when the lighting is dim. I still sometimes catch a different expression on my reflection's face. I might be going crazy. It's possible. But I know what I see. I don't want to sleep in the living room just to avoid passing by the mirror at night. I also don't want to tear apart my hallway by myself. For now, I'm waiting for the landlord to get back to me with the name of a contractor. Every night I walk by that mirror with my heart in my throat. I keep my eyes forward, but I can feel it there, cold and silent on the wall. And in those moments, I swear there's another presence in the apartment, hidden just behind that glass, waiting for a chance to slip out. I'm not sure what else to do. I just know that as soon as I can, I'll pay whatever it costs to get that mirror removed. I can't live with it anymore, and I can't shake the feeling that it's getting worse. I never expected a simple drive home to turn into one of the strangest nights of my life. I was on a small, unlit road, and I only needed about 30 minutes to get back. I had done this trip many times before without any issues. That night, everything felt slightly off, but I tried to ignore the feeling. I had a full tank of gas. I had checked the time on my phone before starting the engine. I knew the route, and I planned to get home by around 2:30 in the morning. It was just a typical drive after a late visit to a neighboring city. Yet somewhere along the way, something happened that still leaves me uneasy when I think about it. I remember leaving that other city after midnight. I had spent the evening there running errands. I stopped for a quick snack at a drive-thru. The roads were empty, and the only other vehicles I saw were a few trucks on the main highway. Nothing stood out at that point. I was a bit tired, but not exhausted. My coffee cup sat in the cup holder, still half full. The route I chose was a back road that cut through a quiet stretch of land. It saved me a bit of time, and I liked avoiding highway traffic. That area rarely saw any police patrols or other drivers. It was dark, calm, and usually boring. But that night it became the backdrop for an event I can't explain. I drove for about 20 minutes on that back road. The streetlights ran out near a cluster of tall trees, and then there was nothing but my headlights slicing through the darkness. The surface of the road was smooth, with a few small cracks here and there. I kept my speed steady, around 50 miles per hour. There were no intersections, no stop signs, and no lights anywhere. It was just me, my car, the road, and the occasional rustle of leaves when the wind picked up. My eyes shifted from the windshield to the rear-view mirror every so often, but I never saw anything behind me. At some point, I noticed a bright light in the distance. It was straight ahead, but too far to make out any details. It looked like headlights on high beam, pointed in my direction and not moving. I assumed maybe a car had pulled over and left its high beams on. I slowed down a bit because I didn't want to pass by too fast and risk an accident if someone was on the shoulder. My car didn't make any strange noises at that point, and the engine temperature gauge showed everything was fine. The gas needle still looked normal. I kept my eyes on that strong light, trying to figure out why someone would stop on a dark road with their lights aimed forward. As I got closer, the glare grew more intense. It wasn't flickering or shifting. It stayed fixed in one spot, almost like a giant flashlight pointed at my windshield. I squinted. My hands tensed on the steering wheel. My arms felt stiff. I leaned forward to see if there was a vehicle behind that glow, but I couldn't make out a shape. I considered blinking a few times to clear my vision. I wondered if my eyes were just adjusting to the darkness, but the light stayed the same. Then, just when I was a few car lengths away, my engine started to sputter. My RPM gauge dipped, and I felt a small jolt. The car lurched as if it was about to stall. My dashboard lights dimmed and flickered. My radio made a static noise for a second, even though it was turned off. I heard my own heartbeat at that point because the sudden change in my car's behavior made me panic. I thought the engine was failing. My foot tapped the brake. I glanced at my seatbelt to make sure it was secure. I checked my mirrors again to see if there was anyone behind me, but the road was empty. I tried to downshift to see if I could keep the engine from dying. For a moment, I felt the power steering tighten, like the car was about to lose power. I pulled my foot off the gas pedal, then pressed it again, hoping the engine would recover. My dashboard flickered once more, and then everything returned to normal. The lights on my console lit up the way they usually do, and the engine stopped sputtering. It was like nothing had happened. I let out a shaky breath. I still saw that bright light ahead, but suddenly it was gone. It didn't fade. It just wasn't there anymore. I looked everywhere, but the road was dark. There was no car, no source of light, nothing at all. I hesitated, wondering if I should stop or keep going. My intuition told me to keep driving. My heart was pounding, and my palms felt clammy. I decided not to stay in that spot any longer. I pressed the accelerator gently, and my car responded fine. It was back to normal. My nerves were on edge, but I tried to calm myself. I glanced at my phone, which was resting on the passenger seat. The screen was dark, but I touched it to check the time. The screen showed 4:34 a.m. That shocked me because the last time I had checked the clock, it was around 2 a.m. I stared at the phone, trying to figure out if maybe I had read it wrong earlier. I felt a knot in my stomach. I was sure that only about half an hour had passed since I left the other city. My drive shouldn't have taken more than 30 or 40 minutes at most. Yet the phone said it was now past 4:30 a.m. I frowned. I looked at the clock on my dashboard. It matched my phone. I realized I had somehow lost almost 2.5 hours. I felt my chest tighten and my breathing got faster. I knew I hadn't stopped anywhere. I hadn't fallen asleep at the wheel. I was alert the entire time. It didn't make sense. I tried to recall everything that had happened since I first saw the bright light. I remembered seeing it in the distance, then the engine trouble, then the sudden normalcy again. I replayed it in my mind, step by step. I couldn't fill the gap of time. It was just gone. 1 second I was approaching that light, and the next, I was looking at my phone, seeing that 2 hours had passed. I kept driving, trying to process it. My heart was still beating hard. I felt a layer of sweat on my forehead, and my shirt was sticking to my back. The road was completely empty as I continued. The darkness stretched on both sides. My high beams showed only asphalt and a row of trees. I tried to spot any sign of a vehicle parked on the side, but I saw nothing. No reflectors, no headlights, no sign of movement. I checked my gas gauge. The needle was lower than it should have been. Before I saw the bright light, the tank was at about 3/4 full. Now it was hovering around the halfway mark, maybe even a bit lower. That didn't match the distance I had traveled. I hadn't driven far enough to burn that much fuel. My mind started racing with explanations. Maybe I had somehow driven for a longer time without noticing. But I couldn't figure out how that was possible. My hands were shaky on the steering wheel. I tried to rationalize what was happening, but my thoughts kept spinning. I wondered if I should call someone, but I felt silly doing that. Also, I was still in the middle of nowhere. There was no point in pulling over. I just wanted to get home. I turned the radio on to see if I could calm my nerves. The static came through before the station tuned in. I flipped through a few channels, but they all sounded empty and distorted for a while. Eventually, I found some late-night talk show, but the reception was weak. I turned it off after a minute because it only made me more uneasy. Finally, the lights of my small town came into view. I looked at the clock again. It was 4:50 a.m. My house wasn't far from the town's entrance. I drove a bit faster, anxious to get inside, lock my door, and figure out what to make of this. When I pulled into my driveway, I stared at my phone one more time. It was 5 a.m. I was nearly 3 hours behind my original schedule. Normally, I would have been home by 2:30 a.m. at the latest. I turned off the engine and sat in my car for a moment. I listened to the ticking of the cooling engine. The silence felt heavy. My shoulders ached, and my legs felt tense. I got out of the car and stretched. The air was cold, and I felt a chill run through my arms and chest. My car looked fine on the outside, no dents or scratches. I checked the tires. They were okay. I opened the hood to see if anything looked out of place. The engine compartment smelled like hot metal, but everything appeared normal. I closed the hood and walked inside. In the kitchen, I dropped my keys on the table. I turned on the light and squinted at the brightness. I felt disoriented, like I had come home from a long trip, but it was just a 30-minute drive. I checked my phone's call log and messages. Nothing new, no missed calls. I opened the map app to see if there was some record of my route, but it only showed a partial track. It didn't explain the missing time. I felt a wave of confusion. My body was tired, but my mind was racing. I poured myself a glass of water and drank it in one go. I noticed my hand was still shaking. I went to the bathroom and splashed water on my face. I stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, and my skin looked pale. I felt a weird sense of detachment. My head pounded a bit, but it wasn't a normal headache. It felt more like pressure around my temples. I undressed, changed into more comfortable clothes, and went back to the kitchen. I opened the fridge, took out some leftovers, and tried to eat. I couldn't focus on the food. My stomach churned. I threw the rest away and sat down at the table. I decided I needed to write down what happened before I forgot. I grabbed a pen and an old notebook. I jotted down the time I left the other city. Then I wrote the time I arrived. I wrote all the details I could remember about the bright light, the engine trouble, and the flickering dashboard. It took me maybe 10 minutes to outline everything. I read it over, trying to see if I missed something obvious. It still didn't add up. I checked the windows a few times, feeling an unsteady sense of paranoia. I kept thinking maybe I'd see that bright light again, or some car that shouldn't be there. But the street outside was dark and quiet. Eventually, I forced myself to get some rest. I didn't expect to sleep much, but I was exhausted. My body craved rest, though my mind was unsettled. The next day, I woke up around noon. I felt groggy, like I had barely rested. My back was stiff, and my neck felt sore. I checked my phone right away. I had a couple of messages from friends sent early that morning, asking why I was still out so late. One of them knew I was supposed to be home around 2:30 a.m. He said he drove by my place at 3 a.m. to drop something off and noticed my car wasn't there. I looked at his messages and felt uneasy all over again. According to him, my driveway was empty at 3 a.m., but I didn't see any message or missed call at that time. My phone log didn't show anything. I texted him back and said I must have taken a longer route, but I didn't go into details. That afternoon, I went outside to check the car again. Everything seemed normal. The gas tank was still around half. There was nothing strange on the exterior. I decided to top off the fuel, so I drove to a nearby station. The car ran fine. No sputtering or flickering lights. It felt like any other day. Yet, I couldn't shake the memory of that bright light and the missing time. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt real. I felt every second of that tension. My heartbeat was real, my sweat was real, and the weird static from the radio was real. There were no burn marks on the road, no sign of a collision, no sign of any other vehicles. I never saw a person, never heard voices, just that harsh white light that vanished. I haven't found a good explanation for what happened. Since that night, I avoid that back road when I can. If I need to drive at night, I take the main highway. I'd rather sit in traffic than experience that strange event again. I still feel anxious when I think about the missing hours, and I don't like looking at my phone's location data. It always feels incomplete and doesn't line up with what I remember. Sometimes I wonder if I should set up a dash cam or something, but part of me doesn't want to see a repeat of what happened, or worse, capture something on video that I can't understand. All I know is I left that neighboring city with a clear mind and a simple plan. get home in half an hour. Instead, I arrived almost 3 hours later, with a lower fuel gauge and no logical reason for the delay. I saw a powerful light that made my car's engine die for a moment, and then I lost track of time. Since then, I haven't come up with a normal explanation. That's the honest account of what happened on that dark road. I can't prove it. I can't show evidence. But I remember how it felt, and I remember the shock of realizing how late it was when I finally got home. It's something I carry with me, even if I can't explain it. I never believed in strange presences or paranormal events. I always assumed everything had a logical explanation. I was wrong. The first time I felt it, I was heading home late, and my mind was already on dinner and the morning's workload. Then I noticed something shift in the darkness behind that concrete column where I always park. It was just a split second, but it turned my night into a tense, nerve-wracking walk to the elevator. I work in a commercial building with an underground parking garage. The place has poor lighting, especially after regular business hours. Most people leave well before 7 or 8 in the evening, so that entire lower level feels abandoned by the time I walk out. My spot is number 37, right next to a thick gray column near the far corner. It's usually convenient because it's close to the exit ramp, but there's a darker area behind that column that barely gets any light from the overhead fixtures. It's not completely pitch black, but it's dim enough that I can't see all the details unless I shine my phone's flashlight. I started noticing something was off about a month ago. I would come down after a long day, maybe around 9 or 10 at night, and I'd get that tight feeling in my chest. My stomach would tense up and I'd feel like I wanted to move faster. I brushed it off as paranoia or stress. But the first physical sign that something was actually happening was when I glimpsed movement in my car's side mirror. I remember it clearly. I was sitting in the driver's seat, door still open, checking my phone for messages. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something shift in the mirror. It was a shape, dark and quick, moving behind the column. I leaned to get a better look, but when I turned my head, there was nothing. No one was there. I got out of my car, walked around it, scanned the place. It was completely silent. I thought maybe the lights flickered, or maybe I moved in a way that cast a strange reflection. I couldn't figure it out, but it stuck in my mind. The second time it happened, I was even more startled. I had just killed the engine, and I saw a shadow in the mirror. This time it was bigger, like a person standing at full height. I spun around. Nobody. Just the echo of my own footsteps and the low hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I know rationally it should have been impossible for something to appear, then vanish. There were no other cars parked around me, and the entire floor was basically empty. I tried to ignore it. My hands were shaking, and I remember wiping my palms on my pants before locking the car. I rushed to the elevator, feeling my heart pounding like I had run up a flight of stairs. Every night after that, I felt uneasy. Sometimes I'd catch a little flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. Sometimes I'd hear a faint scraping sound, like a shoe sliding on the concrete. It was never loud. It was always gentle, almost delicate, as if someone was trying not to be heard. But the hair on my arms would stand up every time. One night I decided to tell the security guard. His name is Nelson. He's a friendly guy, probably in his mid-50s, always smiling. He laughed at first. He thought I was messing with him. Then I noticed his smile fade a bit. He told me, "I close that main gate around midnight. Sometimes I hear steps too. Very light ones, like a person walking slowly." He shrugged, tried to play it off, but I could see in his face that it bothered him. I started to leave work earlier to avoid that creepy feeling. But sometimes I couldn't leave on time. The nature of my job forced me to stay late. On those nights, I dreaded walking downstairs. I'd stand in the elevator and feel my stomach tightening as the numbers dropped from the ground floor to the basement. Then the doors would slide open and that stale, musty smell of the garage would creep in. The lights would flicker sometimes, but not always. The one nearest my space, though, had a tendency to blink every now and then, giving that area a jittery glow. I remember one particular Friday. I left the office at around 11. It was one of those nights when everything was dead quiet. I walked to my car with my eyes darting around, checking every corner. My footsteps echoed. I could hear them in the distance, almost like they were following me. I pressed the button on my remote to unlock the doors. The car beeped and the lights flashed. My spot felt darker than usual. I turned my phone flashlight on and aimed it around. My heart was racing. I noticed a smudge or a dark spot on the ground near the column, but I couldn't tell what it was. It looked like a patch of oil. I leaned in to examine it, but it just looked like any other random stain you find in a parking garage. Then I heard a faint tapping sound, like someone tapping a finger against the concrete. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I swung the flashlight beam behind the column. I saw nothing. My heartbeat pounded so hard I could feel it in my ears. I took a few steps back, climbed into my car, and slammed the door. I locked it immediately. I turned on the engine and tried to calm down, but my hands were trembling. I checked all my mirrors. Nothing there. I backed out and left, barely able to keep my eyes on the road as I headed up the ramp. The next Monday, I decided to change spots. I found another space on a different level, but someone complained that I was in their designated spot. Management told me I had to park in my assigned space or find a different arrangement. I was stuck with number 37 again. I tried to reason with them, mentioning the poor lighting, but they said they couldn't do much about it right now, and that they'd schedule an electrician at some point. I didn't argue further. That night I stayed until about 8. I felt nervous, but it was still somewhat early. There were a few other cars around. I thought maybe it would help me feel safer if I wasn't alone. The elevator ride down was quiet, except for 2 coworkers chatting about dinner plans. I followed them out, watching them head to their cars. I saw them drive off. Then I was alone again. The overhead lights buzzed. I could hear a faint flickering noise. I walked to my car, trying to keep my steps steady. My breathing was heavy. My scalp tingled with that same sense of being watched. I fumbled with my keys, dropped them, bent down to pick them up. That's when I heard a soft rustle of clothing behind the column. It sounded like fabric brushing against a rough surface. I straightened up and turned my head slowly. Nothing. The column was just a block of concrete. I walked around it to be sure. I aimed my phone flashlight everywhere. There was only a bare wall behind it, plus some cables along the ceiling. No sign of any person. I forced a laugh at myself, but I could feel sweat on my forehead. I told myself I was being paranoid. Still, my body didn't believe me. My hands were shaking, and my chest felt tight. Over the next few days, the strange events kept happening. Little flickers of shadow in my peripheral vision, odd clicks, or faint footsteps when I was leaving late. Sometimes the light above my car would blink rapidly, and that corner behind the column would look darker than ever. I started to dread closing my door. I'd grip the door handle, staring into my side mirror, expecting to see a shape. More than once, I did see something. It was always brief. A flicker of movement, a silhouette. But gone the second I turned my head. I talked to Nelson again. He admitted that he was spooked at times. He told me he once stayed late to finish some paperwork, and as he locked the main entrance, he heard what sounded like someone calling his name in a whisper. He checked every floor, found nobody. He said he told management, but they shrugged it off. He started carrying a flashlight with stronger beams whenever he did his rounds. One Friday, I tried leaving right at 5. Traffic was bad outside, so I ended up staying in the office until 7 to get more work done. By the time I got downstairs, the garage was almost deserted. I felt my heart rate climb. I tried to distract myself by texting my wife. I even pretended to talk on the phone so I wouldn't have to focus on the dark area near my car. As I got closer, I saw that the light above my spot was blinking on and off in a slow pattern. Each time it went off, I felt a surge of panic. When it came back on, I noticed the column's shadow looked longer. I reached my car, unlocked it, and got in. I put my bag on the passenger seat. Then I did something different. I turned on the interior light and decided to just sit for a moment. I wanted to see if anything happened. My heart was racing so fast I thought I might lose my nerve. The overhead lamp above the car kept flickering. Then I heard a scraping sound. It was the sound of shoes on the concrete. That's the best way I can describe it. A slow, shuffling step. It echoed in the garage. I held my breath, leaning forward to see out the windshield. The pillars blocked a lot of my view, so I couldn't see past the one in front of me. I checked the rearview mirror. Nothing. I glanced at the side mirror. My hands began to sweat again. Suddenly, the overhead lamp went out for 2 long seconds. It felt like forever. My pulse jumped. I kept staring at the side mirror. Then the light came back on, and I swore I saw a tall shape behind the column. I sucked in my breath, then I slammed the car into reverse. My engine roared as I hit the gas. I nearly scraped the column. My car lurched backward, and I sped to the exit, tires screeching on the smooth floor. My entire body was shaking. My mind was racing. I didn't look back until I was at the top of the ramp. When I did, there was nothing. Just empty space and the dull glow of the garage lights. All weekend, I felt on edge. I tried to tell my wife, but she laughed it off. She said maybe I was just tired. I didn't push it. I didn't want to sound like I was losing it, but I couldn't stop thinking about that shape. It looked too solid to be a trick of the light. On Monday, I reached out to building management again. I told them the light in spot 37 was malfunctioning. They said they were aware of the issue and would fix it soon. They never gave me a date. I asked if I could change my space permanently. They told me the spots were assigned based on the lease agreement. I had no choice unless I wanted to pay for an upgrade. I decided it wasn't worth the extra money. That same night, I left around 9. The building was quiet. Nelson was at his desk, typing up his end-of-day report. I waved to him and headed to the elevator. As soon as I got to the basement, I felt that rush of dread again. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my cool. The light above my spot was on, but it flickered a bit. My steps echoed as I moved. My breathing felt shallow. I stopped walking about 10 feet from my car and listened. Silence. Then I heard a soft click, like metal tapping concrete. I slowly moved toward the sound, shining my phone flashlight near the column. There was nothing there. I exhaled and cursed under my breath, then got into my car. I started it up and checked my mirrors. This time, I didn't see anything. I thought I was safe for that moment, but as soon as I backed out of my spot, the overhead light flickered. In that split second of darkness, I thought I saw the shape again, like it was pressed against the far side of the column. A cold sweat broke out over my forehead. My arms felt weak and my hands tingled. I floored the gas and sped up the ramp, nearly clipping the walls as I turned. I told Nelson again the next morning. He admitted he was hearing those steps almost nightly now. He also said he heard a faint whistle one evening, but he couldn't tell if it was the wind or something else. We both agreed there was something off about that garage. We didn't know what. We didn't have answers, but we knew it wasn't normal. Nelson said he would keep an eye on the surveillance feeds. I told him to let me know if he saw anything. A few days passed. The repairs on the flickering light still hadn't happened. I kept leaving earlier, sometimes skipping lunch so I could finish my tasks and get out before dark. But one Wednesday, I got stuck with a conference call that lasted until almost 9:30. By the time I made it downstairs, I was exhausted. I could barely keep my eyes open, and all I wanted was to go home and crash. The garage was quiet as ever. I walked slowly, scanning the space. The columns cast long shadows across the ground. I saw my car in the distance. I felt my chest tighten. I heard my own footsteps and tried to walk quickly, but each step felt heavy. When I was about 5 steps away from my car, the light above it flickered again. The rest of the garage was illuminated, but that specific area kept blinking. My heart hammered. I got inside, started the engine, locked the doors. I glanced at the side mirror out of sheer habit. That's when I saw a long black shape slide away from view behind the column. It moved fast. My mind went blank with fear. I revved the engine and sped out, heart pounding, muscles tense. I have no explanation for what I saw, but I know it was real. I know the security guard has heard things. I feel that presence every time the light flickers, every time I approach spot 37. I keep telling myself it's just some trick of the lighting, some strange reflection, or maybe the wind moving debris. But it doesn't feel like that. It feels like someone is there. I can't describe it any other way. Whenever I'm alone at night in that garage, I sense that I'm being watched from that dark corner. I see the shadow in my mirror. I hear the soft shuffling. And I can't shake the feeling that one day, when I turn around, I'm going to find something standing there staring back at me. Until management fixes the light or lets me park somewhere else, I'm stuck dealing with this tension every night I stay late. I hate that walk to the elevator. I hate the moment I unlock my car and slide into the driver's seat, not knowing if something's right behind that column just out of my line of sight. I don't have any big conclusion or revelation. This is just what's been happening. It's unsettling, and I'm not sure how to handle it. Every time I step into that garage, my stomach twists, and I can't wait to get out. I lock my doors and drive off as fast as I can. That's my story so far. I'm hoping it ends soon, but right now I have no idea what's lurking behind that column in spot 37. I just know it's there, and it doesn't feel friendly. I opened my eyes in the middle of the night with a jolt. My bedsheets felt damp from my sweat and my heart was hammering. I stared at the ceiling, trying to slow my breathing. I had just woken up from a dream that felt too real. It wasn't just any dream. I saw an older version of myself standing in front of me, talking to me like he knew every single detail of my life. I could still picture his face. He looked like me, but his hair was thinner, and his skin had more lines. He spoke with a rougher voice, and he told me things I never expected to hear. That first time, I didn't remember much when I woke up. I just knew it felt too real, like I had just met myself in a different timeline. I tried to push the memory aside the next morning. I showered, got dressed, and went to work. I work in a small office that handles logistics for local companies. My job is pretty straightforward. Organize shipments, deal with schedules, fill out forms. Most days are uneventful. I sit at my desk, type on my keyboard, and try to keep track of deliveries. That day, though, I kept replaying the dream in my mind. I remembered how the older version of me mentioned a name of a place. It sounded like a small town or maybe a warehouse location. I couldn't remember the exact name. I only recalled it started with an R and had something like sun at the end. I even tried to scribble it on a notepad during my break, but it slipped away. My head started hurting when I tried to force the memory. It wasn't a normal headache. It felt like someone was pressing on the sides of my skull right above my temples. That night, I fell asleep hoping I'd have a normal rest. But I dreamed again. This time, I found myself in a large hallway. The walls were white and the floor felt cold under my bare feet. Then I spotted the older version of me at the end of the corridor. He beckoned me to follow him. I didn't question it in the dream, I just walked behind him. He led me into a small office that looked like a counselor's room or something like that. There was a desk, a few chairs, and a lamp. He pointed to the lamp and said something about decisions. He mentioned a date, July 14th, and said that on that date I would need to be ready for a sudden change at work. He said I'd get an offer I shouldn't ignore. Then he turned to me with a serious look and said, "Don't hesitate. Say yes." I tried to ask what he meant, but he shook his head and told me I'd understand soon. I woke up before I could say anything else. My head was throbbing again. I felt an urge to write everything down, but the moment I reached for a pen, a wave of dizziness hit me. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor. My stomach felt unsettled. My forehead was damp. I started writing. July 14th. Big change. Say yes. But I couldn't remember more details. When I tried to push further, the pain in my head got worse. I stopped. My breathing was shallow, and I felt a tingling sensation in my hands. Over the next few weeks, the dreams kept coming. Each dream had a slightly different setting. Sometimes I was in a parking lot. Sometimes I was in my own bedroom, but it looked older and more worn. Each time, that older version of me appeared and gave me bits of information. He talked about meetings, job opportunities, and a few random details that made little sense to me. I caught words like Renfield, storage contract, and branch expansion. None of it sounded familiar. It felt like a puzzle, but every time I tried to remember all the pieces, my head started pounding. One morning, I woke up with a sharp pain in my right arm. I looked down and saw a faint mark that ran from my wrist to the middle of my forearm. It wasn't a scar. It was more like a scratch that I didn't notice until I touched it. It felt tender and raw. It reminded me of something I'd seen in my dream a few days before. In that dream, I saw my older self roll up his sleeve. He showed me a scar on his arm that looked like a long line, partially healed. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now I had a similar mark in the exact spot. My heart started racing. I went to the bathroom to wash it, but the sting made me inhale sharply. I had no memory of cutting myself while awake. I had gone to bed feeling fine, yet I woke up with this scratch that seemed fresh. It wasn't deep, but it definitely looked like it would leave a scar. A couple of weeks later, while doing some errands in town, I passed a sign for a new warehouse project. The sign read something like Renson Development or Renson Storage Solutions. I can't recall perfectly, but my stomach flipped when I saw it. It triggered a flashback to the dream where my older self mentioned a place that started with R and ended in Sun. I stopped walking and just stared at the sign for a few seconds. My pulse sped up. I felt sweat forming under my shirt. A woman passing by glanced at me, probably wondering if I was okay. I forced myself to keep walking, but I felt shaky. My mind was racing. I thought about the older version of me and the words he had spoken. It was too specific to be a coincidence. Then July 14th came around. I'd almost forgotten the exact date because I had been swamped at work. Around mid-morning, my boss came up to my desk. He told me about a new role opening up at a different branch. It was some sort of coordinator position. He said it would involve a bigger workload, but also a higher salary. It sounded like a jump up the career ladder. He mentioned I needed to let him know by the end of the week if I wanted to be considered. I felt my chest tighten because this was exactly what my older self had hinted at. He had told me that I'd get an offer, and I should say yes. It was eerie how it matched the dream. My boss's wording was unexpected too. He said, "Don't hesitate too long, okay? We need a quick decision." That sounded a lot like what the older me had said. I told my boss I'd do it. I didn't think twice. I felt my hands tremble when I spoke, but I tried to sound confident. He nodded and seemed relieved. The rest of the day felt surreal. I caught myself looking around the office, half expecting to see my older self walk by. I couldn't concentrate on my usual tasks. My mind kept drifting to those dreams and the fact that this was exactly what I'd been warned about. I knew I had to keep it together. I didn't want to look paranoid, so I finished my tasks in a mechanical way, typing and filing paperwork while I counted the hours until I could leave. A few days after I accepted the new position, I had another dream. This time it was very brief. I saw my older self in a half-finished building, walking along a row of desks covered in plastic sheets. He paused, turned to me and said, "You made the right call. Just be ready for the next step." I wanted to ask him questions, but I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight, like I was choking. He vanished before I could move. When I woke up, I felt cold sweat on my back and my pillow was damp. I groaned and tried to recall every detail, but the moment I reached for my phone to record a voice memo, my head started pounding again. I dropped the phone on the bed and clutched the side of my skull. It felt like a migraine, but 10 times worse. My stomach churned and my vision blurred for a moment. I stayed still until it passed. These headaches kept me from writing down the dreams. I tried a few more times. I even considered talking into a tape recorder instead of writing, just to see if that would help. But every time I tried to organize my thoughts, I felt that same pressure in my head. It was worse when I tried to recall specific dates or names. It was almost like my body wouldn't let me record them. I started avoiding the topic during the day. I tried to act normal, but every night I braced myself for the possibility that I'd see my older self again. One evening I noticed the scratch on my arm had finally healed. It left a thin, pale line just like I saw in my dream. I stared at it in the bathroom mirror for a few minutes, shifting my arm under the light. My heart pounded, and my mouth felt dry. I touched the scar. It felt smooth, but it stood out against my skin. I felt a jolt of nerves in my stomach. It was another piece of evidence that these dreams weren't just random. They had some connection to reality. I didn't have a grand explanation for it, but I couldn't deny it anymore. The new job role started 2 weeks later. I moved to a different branch office on the other side of town. It was a more modern building with big windows and open workstations. On my first day, the regional manager showed me around. We stopped at a conference room. A group of people sat around a table, talking about a new contract with a storage company. I looked at a brochure they had on the table. The name Renson Storage Solutions was printed in big letters. I felt a chill run down my spine. I thought back to the day I saw that sign. I also thought about the name the older me mentioned. My hands started to sweat, and I rubbed them on my pants. I listened as they described the project's requirements. They needed someone to coordinate schedules, manage shipments, and handle tricky details. Apparently, that's why they brought me in. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. My thoughts raced. I felt an ache behind my eyes. I wanted to know if I'd dream again, but part of me was terrified of what I'd see. The last few months had been a roller coaster. I kept thinking about how each piece of advice or warning from my older self led to real events. I felt a strange combination of excitement and dread. I couldn't ignore it anymore. My chest felt tight, and my stomach turned every time I considered what might happen next. I wondered if I'd get more instructions, more clues about the future. I also wondered if I'd ever see that older version of me again. For a few days, I didn't dream about him at all. I just had normal dreams, or no dreams that I could recall. My work at the new branch became routine. I learned the new systems, met some colleagues, and tried to focus on doing a good job. But every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of my reflection in a window, and I'd see little changes in my face. Maybe it was just stress. Maybe I was imagining the faint lines near my eyes. I'd run a hand through my hair, worried it was thinner on top, like in those dreams. Then, last week, the dreams returned. I saw myself standing in an empty office space. My older self was there again, looking more tired than before. He spoke quietly. He said something about another opportunity coming up soon, something that would test my limits. He didn't specify a date, but he hinted it was close. I tried to question him, but he just shook his head. He said, "You won't understand right now. Trust what you feel. Follow your gut." Then he reached out, touched my shoulder, and vanished. I woke up gasping for air, my legs tangled in the sheets. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. So now I'm here, feeling anxious every time my phone rings or my boss calls me into his office. I'm waiting for that next clue, that next twist that my older self warned me about. I'm trying to stay calm, but the tension is constant. My arms feel tight, and my stomach churns whenever I think about it. Every time I check my reflection, I wonder if I'm heading toward that older face I keep seeing in my dreams. I still can't explain what's happening. I only know that these dreams predicted some real events in my life. I don't know if they're going to stop. I don't know if I'll look in the mirror one day and see that older version of me staring back. For now, I'm on high alert, waiting for the next sign, trying to keep my head from splitting every time I remember too much. I feel like I'm trapped in a loop, but I can't escape it. And I don't even know if I want to. All I can do is brace myself for whatever comes next. I never expected to feel my own body slam against a steering wheel while I was still standing behind the restaurant's front counter. But that's exactly what happened a few nights ago, right after closing time. I was sorting through the day's receipts at our small place on Elm Street. One minute I was double-checking the numbers, and the next, I felt like I was inside my car, smashing into something on the avenue out front. My chest felt tight, my arms tensed, and there was a split second of pain. Then I snapped back and realized I was still inside the restaurant. I let out a yell so loud it made my coworker in the kitchen run out to see if I was okay. I stood there, leaning over the counter with my palms pressed against it, heart racing. I didn't understand what I'd just experienced. The restaurant was quiet because I had locked up the doors and sent almost everyone home, except for one other guy who was finishing up washing the last pots. I glanced at him, told him I was fine. My voice sounded shaky. He asked if I was sure, and I just nodded and said I'd handle it. He shrugged and went back to his pots, probably assuming I'd had some weird dizzy spell from lack of sleep. But this was different. I was wide awake. It felt like I'd actually been in a collision. It took me about a minute to settle down. My chest was still tight, and I kept swallowing because my throat felt dry. My arms trembled a bit, and my forehead was damp with sweat. I tried to focus on the receipts again. I stood there with the cash drawer open, counting the bills in small stacks. The numbers swam in my vision, so I took a few deep breaths. My watch said it was 11:23 p.m. I wanted to get home. I told myself I'd finish the count, close up properly, and then leave. I forced myself to look outside through the glass window at the front of the restaurant. The streetlights along the avenue created patches of light on the asphalt. There was an empty parking spot near the curb, and my car was parked just beyond that, right by a tall street lamp. Nothing unusual. No movement. No sign of trouble. The street was almost deserted, maybe one or two cars drifting by every few minutes. I began to wonder if I was just losing it after a long day. We had a couple of big groups at dinner, and I'd been on my feet since mid-afternoon. Maybe exhaustion was messing with me. I closed the cash drawer, locked it, and grabbed my keys. I stepped back into the kitchen to tell my coworker I was heading out. He waved a wet hand at me and said he'd finish mopping. The dishwasher was humming, and I heard the last few plates clanking inside. I thanked him for staying behind. He just nodded. I walked to the back office, filled out the closing log, and grabbed my jacket. My mind kept drifting back to that strange flash, that brief moment where I'd felt actual impact. I could still feel the jolt in my upper body, like the memory of that sensation was fresh in my muscles. When I was done, I stepped through the dining area, unlocked the front door, and stepped onto the sidewalk. The city air felt cool against my face. I could smell the faint odor of car exhaust and fast food grease from the joint down the street. I shivered a little because I was still shaken. My car keys jingled in my hand. The sidewalk was empty, the lamp above me buzzing. I walked toward my car, and that was when I heard a screech of tires. My stomach dropped. It sounded violent, like rubber grinding against the pavement with full force. I spun around. I saw headlights weaving on the avenue, then a car lost control and veered toward the curb. The vehicle slid sideways, jumped the sidewalk, and slammed into a thick metal lamppost. Sparks flew when it hit, and there was a loud bang that reminded me of metal crashing in the kitchen but amplified 100 times. The shock of it sent a blast of adrenaline through my body. My heart started pounding so hard that I felt it in my temples. I stood there frozen for a second. The car that hit the post was the same color and model I'd seen in my flash. It was a gray sedan, maybe a few years old, with a slight dent on the rear fender. In my vision, I remembered seeing the same shape, the same color, the same angle of collision. The front of the sedan was now crumpled around the pole, steam escaping from under the hood. I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of it. A few other people came running from nearby shops or from further down the sidewalk. Someone was shouting, "Call 911!" People converged on the crash site. The driver's door opened and the driver stumbled out, looking dazed. He put a hand on his forehead, and I saw blood trickling down his cheek. His eyes were wide, and he was breathing heavily. But he was standing, which meant he was conscious and probably not in a life-threatening condition. My stomach churned with a mix of relief and fear. I took out my phone to call emergency services, but I heard someone else say they were already on the line with them. So I moved closer to see if the driver needed help. My hands felt cold, even though it wasn't that cold outside. The driver leaned against the side of the car, breathing in fast bursts. A few people tried talking to him, asking if he was okay. He muttered something about losing control of the steering. He said it happened so fast. He kept repeating, "I don't know what happened," over and over. He wasn't slurring, and I didn't smell alcohol, so I couldn't tell if he was just rattled or if something else caused it. Another bystander took off his jacket and pressed it against the driver's forehead to stop the bleeding. The driver winced but didn't pull away. I hung back, not wanting to crowd him. Then I glanced at my own car, which was only a few yards away. If that sedan had come at a slightly different angle, my own car would have been crushed. I exhaled slowly, realizing how close that had been. My mouth felt dry again, and I was a little lightheaded. I walked over to a bench on the sidewalk and sat down. My legs felt wobbly, so I kept my hands on my knees, leaning forward a bit to steady myself. I thought about the weird flash I'd had inside the restaurant. That sudden image of me in an accident. It had felt so real. And then this happened in almost the exact same spot, with a car just like mine. Within a few minutes, I heard sirens. An ambulance arrived, followed by a police cruiser. The paramedics rushed to check on the driver. They helped him onto a stretcher. He seemed disoriented but was talking, so that was a good sign. A couple of police officers started directing traffic and talking to witnesses. One of them asked me if I saw what happened. I admitted that I only heard the screech and turned around in time to see the car slide. He asked if I had any idea what might have caused it. I shook my head. Then I heard someone else say they saw no reason for the driver to lose control like that. It wasn't raining and the road wasn't wet. There was no other car around that might have cut him off. A few witnesses talked among themselves, saying it was weirdly sudden. I noticed my hands were still shaking. I shoved them in my jacket pockets to hide it. The police took notes from a few people and asked if anyone had dashcam footage. I just stayed quiet. My mind was on that strange vision I'd had. It wasn't the right time to mention it, but it stuck in my head. I felt nauseous for a few seconds, like my stomach was twisting. The memory of that phantom impact lingered in my chest, and every time I blinked, I saw a split-second image of the crash all over again. I tried to push it aside. I forced myself to stand and walk around a little. I approached my own car. It was intact, no damage. I looked at the distance between my car and the lamppost. It couldn't have been more than 15 feet. If the sedan had spun out just a little differently, it might have rammed into my vehicle. The thought of that made the hair on the back of my neck rise. I looked over at the wreck. The hood was completely smashed, and the front bumper lay on the ground, split in two. The lamppost had a fresh dent. There was shattered glass all over the asphalt. I kicked a small piece out of the way, feeling like I was in some sort of slow-motion haze. The police told everybody to stand back while they waited for a tow truck. The paramedics were still checking the driver. I saw them load him into the ambulance. He was conscious, nodding when they spoke to him. He didn't look like he was in critical condition, but he was definitely hurt. I heard him say something about, it felt like something jerked the wheel out of my hand, but the paramedics just told him to calm down and save his energy. Then they closed the ambulance doors and drove off. The siren faded down the street. I watched as the police started clearing the debris. Another officer came over to me, asked for my statement again just to be sure. I told him the same thing. I heard the tires screech, turned, and saw the crash. He asked for my name and contact information in case they needed a follow-up. He said they suspected it might have been mechanical failure or a medical issue, but it was still under investigation. They asked me if I knew the driver. I shook my head. They thanked me and let me go. I walked back to the restaurant, locked the front door properly, and slid the key into my jacket pocket. The dishwasher guy had already left through the back, so the place was dark. I turned on my car's engine and just sat there for a moment, trying to calm my nerves. My breathing was shallow and I could feel sweat on my brow again. I turned on the air conditioner and let the cold air blast against my face. That helped me catch my breath. My hands were no longer shaking, but I still felt that weird tension in my shoulders. As I pulled away from the curb, I kept glancing at the spot where the sedan had crashed. The pole was crooked and there was caution tape wrapped around the base. A police car was still there, lights flashing. My stomach felt uneasy, and I could taste a bit of acid in my mouth. I tried to swallow it down. I gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual as I drove down the avenue. My headlights illuminated the street in front of me, and I forced myself to focus on the road. During the drive home, I couldn't get that flash out of my head. The feeling of the seatbelt digging into my chest, the jarring sensation when the car slammed into something. I could still feel the jolt in my body. It hadn't happened physically, but it was real in my mind. I kept blinking, checking the mirrors. Everything looked normal. No other cars were swerving, no sudden obstacles. After a few blocks, I turned onto a quieter street and tried to calm down. My breathing became steadier. I loosened my grip on the wheel, but my knuckles were still a little sore. I parked in my driveway, turned off the engine, and sat there for a long moment. My heart rate was almost back to normal, but I felt drained, like I had been through a real car accident. I leaned my head against the headrest, closed my eyes, and inhaled. The only sound was the ticking of the engine cooling down. My arms felt heavy. I had this urge to check for bruises on my chest or arms, like I might find physical proof of that vision. But I didn't see anything. My shirt was dry. My skin looked the same. I rubbed my eyes, grabbed my bag from the passenger seat, and went inside. I locked my door behind me and flicked on the hallway light. It was quiet in my apartment, and I dropped my keys onto the little table by the entrance. I slipped off my shoes and just stood there, unsure what to do next. My mind kept playing the crash over and over. The screech, the slam, the same exact color and model of car I drive. My hands were shaky again. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, gulping it down in a few seconds. That helped a bit. I set the glass on the counter, stared at it, and tried to ground myself in the moment. A few minutes later, I decided there wasn't much else I could do. The driver had been taken care of by the paramedics. The police were investigating. Nobody else got hurt and my car was fine. But I couldn't ignore the fact that I'd seen something or felt something before it happened. I turned off the kitchen light, walked to my bedroom, and sat down on the edge of my bed. My mind was racing. Still, I tried not to think about the deeper meaning behind it. All I knew was that I'd had some sort of intense, vivid flash. And then a real accident occurred almost the same way I'd envisioned. I didn't have answers, and I didn't want to linger on it. My chest felt tight, so I lay back on my pillows and took slow breaths. I stayed awake longer than I intended, staring at the ceiling in the dark. Now and then, I'd hear the echo of that crash in my head, but eventually my exhaustion took over. I just let myself drift off, hoping I'd feel calmer in the morning. As I closed my eyes, I felt the weight of the day pressing down on me. I didn't dream about the accident again, but I woke up a couple of times in the night with my heart pounding. I'm not sure if I'll ever fully shake off the memory of that sudden flash. It was just too real. And seeing that exact car smashed in the exact spot I'd envisioned was something I'll never forget. I still remember the first time I stepped into that penthouse. I expected it to feel spacious and bright, but there was a strange weight in the air. It felt like something pressed on my chest. I couldn't see anything unusual. The open living room looked neat. There was a wide sofa, a small table, and big glass doors leading to a terrace with a view of the city. The floors were polished, and the walls were spotless. Still, something felt off. The owner, an acquaintance I knew through a friend, had asked me to stay there for a few days. He was traveling and needed someone to water his plants and keep an eye on the place. I thought it was a good deal. I got a free stay in a penthouse with a great view, and all I had to do was make sure the greenery didn't die. When I arrived, I walked around to familiarize myself with each room. The kitchen was small but modern. The counters were clean, and there was a single mug by the sink. I saw a few potted plants on the windowsill, small succulents and a tall leafy one that almost touched the ceiling. There was a short hallway leading to the bedroom. The bed was a queen size, the sheets were crisp, and the closet was empty except for a few hangers. I glanced at the bathroom, which had a shiny shower door and no signs of mold or mildew. Everything looked fine. The place was quiet, but the silence was too sharp. I tried to ignore the tight feeling in my gut and told myself I was just being paranoid. The first day went smoothly. I watered the plants, made a quick meal in the kitchen, and spent time checking the view from the terrace. I remember leaning on the railing, staring at the city lights. It was gorgeous. Cars moved below in slow lines, people were walking, and the hum of traffic was distant but steady. It was a warm night, so I left the glass door open to let in the breeze. I didn't notice anything strange until I lay down to sleep. Around midnight, I heard a soft scraping sound, like metal brushing against metal. It came from the front door. My heart started beating faster. I got out of bed, walked to the door, and listened. I heard something like a key turning, but not smoothly. It was more like someone was struggling with the lock. I switched on the hallway light and stood there. My pulse pounded in my ears. Suddenly I heard a click and I felt the doorknob move as if someone locked it from outside. I twisted the knob, but it didn't turn. It felt stuck. I couldn't open the door at all. I panicked. I tried jiggling the knob, pushing my shoulder against the door, even throwing my weight against it. It refused to budge. My scalp tingled, and my palms got sweaty. I kept imagining that I'd swing the door open and see a stranger standing on the other side. Instead, I heard a soft thud, like something brushing against the door from the outside, and then silence. I stopped to catch my breath. I felt my pulse hammering, and every breath was too loud. After maybe a minute, I put my ear to the door. Nothing. Then I gave the knob another twist. This time it turned without any resistance, like normal. I pulled the door open. The hallway outside was well lit by a single light fixture. I didn't see anyone. I stepped into the corridor and looked around. It was empty. No footprints on the floor, no sign of forced entry. I checked the lock, expecting to find scratches or damage, but it looked the same as before. I rubbed my eyes and took a deep breath. I kept telling myself it was a glitch with the lock. Maybe the building had some old security system, or someone accidentally tried the wrong door. I went back inside and locked the door from the inside, then tested it a few times. It worked fine. I felt uneasy, but I tried to sleep. The next morning, I checked the hallway again. Nothing looked different, so I let the incident slide. I spent the afternoon picking up groceries, cleaning up a bit, and reading. I told myself that the night before was probably just a random fluke. By the time evening rolled around, I started feeling restless. The memory of that locked door kept creeping back into my mind. That night, I heard heavy footsteps on the terrace. They were slow and deliberate. I froze for a second, heart pounding, then grabbed my phone and rushed toward the living room. The glass door was shut, and the curtains were half drawn. I could hear the sound of feet scraping on concrete. It didn't sound like normal footsteps, it was more like someone was shuffling around. My stomach twisted. I flicked on the living room lights, hoping it would scare away whoever was outside. The footsteps stopped. I moved to the glass door and tried to slide it open, but it felt stuck, like something was jamming the track. The handle wouldn't budge. I pulled harder. Nothing. I pressed my face to the glass, but the reflection from the light made it tough to see. I switched off the living room light and looked again. The terrace was dimly lit by the city glow. I could make out the table and a couple of chairs. No one was there. I pushed on the door, but it wouldn't move. My arms were shaking and a bead of sweat rolled down my temple. I suddenly felt a blast of cold air blowing in through a small gap in the frame. It didn't make sense because it was a warm night. The air felt icy against my face and arms. I shivered. My teeth pressed together and my heart thumped. I tried the handle again. It moved a fraction. And then, just as quickly, the door slid open easily, like there was never any resistance. I stepped out onto the terrace, my legs stiff. The night was humid and warm, but that icy breeze was gone. I checked every corner of the space. The table was in its usual spot. There were no footprints, no sign of movement. Nothing was out of place. I went back inside, closed the door, and locked it. My hands were trembling as I pulled the curtains shut. I double-checked the lock, then switched off the lights in the living room and returned to the bedroom, where I spent the night tossing and turning. Early the next morning, I decided to inspect the entire apartment in daylight. I searched for loose windows or any other way someone could sneak in. Everything looked secure. The plants were fine. I watered them, trying to distract myself from the tension in my chest. By noon, I was pacing around, feeling annoyed at my own nerves. It was just a place. It had locks and walls like any other. I told myself I'd get through the few days left without losing it. That afternoon, I went to wipe down the front door. I had started noticing a thin layer of dust along the edges. As I approached, I froze. On the outside of the door, near the handle, there were these faint handprints. They looked like someone pressed their palms into the dust. They were smudged and not very detailed, but they were clearly shaped like hands. My throat tightened. I felt a chill go through my body. I slowly opened the door and looked into the corridor. It was empty. I touched the prints. The dust flaked off, leaving my fingertips dirty. I had no idea how they got there. The hallway wasn't dusty at all. There was a small doormat and the walls were white and clean. It made no sense. I went back inside and shut the door. My heart was pounding again. I couldn't stop looking at those marks. I grabbed a damp cloth and wiped them away. It took a few passes to get rid of the outline. Then I locked the door again, checked every room for intruders, and sat on the sofa, trying to calm down. My mind ran in circles. If someone was playing a prank, they had to have a key or be really sneaky. But there was no sign of forced entry, and the building had a decent security system in the lobby. I had to show my ID every time I came in. It didn't make sense that someone was messing with me so consistently. That evening, I forced myself to do normal stuff. I cooked dinner, watched a bit of TV, and made a video call to a friend. I didn't mention the weird stuff. I just tried to act normal. Around 11 p.m., I turned off the lights and went to bed, determined to sleep through the night without jumping at every sound. For a few hours, it worked. I dozed off. Then, around 3 a.m., I woke up abruptly. There was a dull, thudding noise, like someone was bumping into a wall. My heart sped up right away. I sat up in bed, listening. The noise stopped. Then I heard a soft click, like something being placed on the floor. I couldn't place the location. It might have come from the living room, or even the hallway outside the door. My body tensed, and a wave of dread crawled up my spine. I realized I didn't want to open the bedroom door. Instead, I grabbed my phone and used the flashlight feature. I slowly tiptoed across the bedroom. When I opened the door, the corridor inside the apartment was dark. I walked toward the living room, scanning around. I didn't see anyone. I checked the terrace door, still locked. The windows were secure. The sofa was where I left it. The TV was off. I didn't see any movement. I stood there listening, my ears straining. It was dead quiet. No hum, no footsteps, nothing. My mouth felt dry, and my shoulders were tight. After a minute of standing there, I shook my head and convinced myself to go back to bed. By the time the sun came up, I felt exhausted. My nerves were shot. I got up, checked the front door again, and saw new smudges in the dust at the base of the doorframe. They looked like tiny streaks, as if someone dragged their fingertips along the bottom edge. I felt my chest tighten again. I knelt down and touched them. My fingertips picked up a thin film of dust. I wiped it away. I had this urge to leave the apartment right then, but the owner had trusted me to stay. I didn't want to bail for no good reason. I still told myself that maybe I was misreading everything. That was my last full day there. I spent it in a state of constant alert. Every little sound made me jump. I checked the door locks a dozen times. I tried to relax on the sofa with the TV on, but I'd keep glancing over my shoulder. The atmosphere felt suffocating. I drank a lot of water and coffee, trying to keep calm and stay awake. That night, I closed all the curtains and locked every door and window. I left a small lamp on in the living room. I lay in bed wide awake until around 2 a.m. Then I heard a scraping sound again. I shot up in bed and grabbed my phone. The noise stopped the moment I stood up. My forehead was damp with sweat. I walked to the front door, heart pounding. The scraping had come from somewhere close to that area. I switched on the hallway light. Nothing. I put my ear to the door. Silence. I flipped the lock and quickly yanked the door open. The corridor was empty. No one stood there. No footprints. No new marks on the door. The overhead light in the hallway flickered once, then stabilized. My hands were shaking. I shut the door, locked it, and stared at it for a few seconds. Then I turned around and noticed the air in the apartment felt warmer than usual. My shirt clung to my back with sweat. There was no sign of a draft or any weird temperature drop. Just heat in my own nerves. By morning, I was done. The owner was due back the next day, so I watered the plants one last time. I took out the trash, tidied up the kitchen, and packed my bag. I felt a wave of relief as I walked out into the hallway for the final time. I left the spare key with the doorman as instructed. I didn't bother mentioning the weird incidents. It felt pointless. If someone else had been messing around, they'd have to deal with the doorman's cameras and security. If it was something else, I didn't want to think about it anymore. When I finally stepped outside the building, the morning sun felt too bright. My eyes stung from lack of sleep. My body felt heavy, but my mind felt lighter, just knowing I was gone from that penthouse. I still can't explain what happened there. I only know that in those few days I heard footsteps, felt cold drafts in warm weather, and found handprints in dust where they shouldn't have been. I don't know if someone was trying to scare me, or if there was some other cause. I just know I'll never stay in that apartment again. Whatever lingered in that place made my skin crawl, and I'm glad I walked out of there in one piece. I moved into this ground floor apartment because I wanted privacy. The tall walls around my private patio looked perfect. I thought I had found my own little fortress. I never expected that the darkest corner of that outdoor space would keep me awake at night. I noticed the damp spot on my first day here. It was late afternoon, and I stepped outside to take a quick look at the property lines. The walls were solid and tall, and the entire outdoor area was paved except for a narrow strip of dirt against one side. Everything looked decent except for a patch of dark mold in the far corner. That area didn't get any sunlight at all. The smell there was musty and thick. I didn't like it, but I just thought I'd deal with the mold later. I unpacked my moving boxes and figured I'd handle everything in time. I remember the first night. I sat in my living room going through some emails when I heard a soft thump coming from outside. I paused and listened. It sounded like a slow, dull tapping on the wall. It wasn't loud, and it felt like something was brushing or scratching from the other side of the concrete. The sound lasted for a few seconds, then stopped. I shrugged it off as outside noise or maybe a neighbor. It seemed silly to worry about it, but it happened again an hour later, just after midnight. It was a short sequence of knocks or scrapes, then silence. It raised the hairs on my arms because it sounded too close, like it came right from that damp corner. The next morning, I went outside to take a better look at that corner. The patch of mold had spread. It formed a dark, uneven pattern on the lower portion of the wall. I walked up to it, and a stale, chilly breeze brushed across my face. It felt like a draft, but there was no opening or vent. The walls were solid. I put my hand close to the surface. It was cold to the touch, and droplets of moisture clung to the wall. I scraped it lightly with a flathead screwdriver I found in my toolbox. The mold came off in thin layers, leaving a slimy residue on the metal. I felt a little nauseous when I saw it. The spot made me uneasy, but it was just mold, so I told myself it was normal in a moist, shaded area. That evening, I placed a plastic garden chair in that corner, thinking I might try to block any weird drafts. I also wanted to see if it stayed damp underneath objects. I went to bed and slept okay until around 3 in the morning. Then I woke up to a faint scraping sound. I got out of bed, walked to the sliding glass door that leads to the patio, and peered outside. The nightlight in the patio area was faint, but I could see something that looked like motion near the corner. I froze. My heart pounded and I felt my palms get sweaty. I stared for maybe 30 seconds. I didn't see anyone. I didn't see any animal either. The sound stopped. I stayed there for another minute, on edge, but eventually I went back to bed. In the morning, I checked the corner. The chair wasn't where I left it. It was 2 or 3 feet away from the wall, shifted to the side. There were faint scrape marks on the concrete, like it had been dragged. It didn't look like wind damage. I tried pushing the chair around to see how easily it moved. It was pretty light, but the scrape marks suggested a deliberate movement. I didn't see footprints or signs of intrusion. The tall walls and locked gate made it unlikely that anyone was hopping inside. Still, it bothered me. I looked up at the sky and realized how shady that area was. The sun never reached it. The rest of the patio got at least a few hours of light during the day, but that corner stayed dim. I tried to calm myself by focusing on normal chores. I unpacked more boxes and assembled some furniture. Yet I couldn't stop thinking about that moldy area. That day, I decided to scrub the wall and see if I could clean it thoroughly. I bought a bottle of mold remover, a stiff brush, and a face mask. The smell of the product mixed with the musty odor made me gag a bit. I spent about half an hour scrubbing the wall. The mold stained the brush, and the runoff was dark gray. After rinsing the wall, I saw that the stain remained. It was lighter, but it wouldn't come off completely. I decided to let it dry and try again another day. That night, I heard the scraping noises again. This time, it sounded like a single tap, a pause, then a slightly louder scratch. I walked to the sliding door and flipped on the exterior light. Nothing moved, but I heard the faint echo of something rubbing against the wall. I felt my heartbeat speed up again. I slid the door open just enough to step outside. The concrete was cold under my bare feet. I took a few steps toward the corner, feeling my chest tighten. A sudden chill blew past me from that direction. I stopped in my tracks. Everything was still. I stared at the wall and felt like something was off. The house next door was dark. The street was quiet. I didn't see or hear a person or an animal. I backed up and went inside, trying to stay calm. Once I locked the door, the sound stopped. The next morning, I found my bucket of cleaning supplies moved about a foot from where I left it. There were fresh scratch marks on the wall, small and shallow, as if someone had scraped the surface with a sharp object. I ran my finger over the marks. It felt rough. Tiny flecks of dried mold or maybe concrete dust stuck to my fingertip. I considered the possibility of an intruder. But how would they get in or out without me noticing? The gate was locked. The walls were tall. The building's main entrance was a long hallway away. I started feeling nervous about staying there alone at night. I decided to install a small security camera pointed directly at that corner. It was a simple setup, a Wi-Fi camera with motion detection and night vision, plus an SD card for local recording. I tested it by waving my hand around the corner. The footage looked clear. That night, I kept the camera on. I went to bed around midnight. I woke up just before 6 in the morning and checked the footage. The file ended around 3 in the morning with a corrupted video. The final minute or so was just garbled pixels, and then it cut off. The camera was still running, but the recording had stopped. I pulled the SD card and tried to view it on my laptop. Nothing. It was all static after a certain point. I had no explanation. The device itself didn't show signs of damage, but the data was useless. I tried again the following night, this time with a different memory card. The same thing happened, corrupted files after a few hours. I even tried a third time, connecting the camera to a different power source, but the problem persisted. I didn't see a single clear frame of what happened past 2 or 3 in the morning. I started to wonder if there was some weird interference or maybe a fault in the camera. But it felt more personal than that. Every time I checked the corner, something was moved or knocked over. I spoke to my neighbor, a retired guy who lived upstairs. He said he never heard anything suspicious at night, and he'd never experienced problems with mold. He asked if maybe I had a rodent issue. I considered it. Could rats or some other animal be responsible? But I couldn't figure out how they could drag a chair or a bucket without leaving signs like droppings or gnaw marks. The neighbor suggested calling the landlord for a mold inspection, but I owned the apartment, so it was my responsibility. I called a professional mold remediation company for a quote. They told me they'd charge a lot to treat the wall with special chemicals and maybe install a dehumidifier in that corner. I made an appointment for the following week. Meanwhile, each night, the noises continued. It was always the same pattern: faint tapping or scraping, usually sometime after midnight. It never lasted more than a few minutes. Sometimes I'd try to ignore it, but I'd get out of bed anyway. I'd walk to the sliding glass door, look outside, and never see anything. When I built up enough courage to step out, the air near that corner felt heavy and cold. If I left anything in that corner, I'd find it moved slightly the next morning. One night, around 2 in the morning, I decided to approach the wall again. I had my phone's flashlight on, shining it directly at the mold patch. The mold looked thicker than before, and the shape of it was uneven. The smell was awful. When I got closer, I thought I saw a faint ripple in the texture, as though the mold was moving. I blinked, stepped forward, and looked again. Up close, it was just wet patches on the concrete, but something about the surface made me shiver. It looked like dozens of tiny pores, each oozing moisture. My stomach churned. I stepped back. Right then, my phone's flashlight flickered for a second. It never did that before. The battery was full. My phone had no damage, but the light flickered again, then went steady. I turned around and walked straight back inside. I shut the door and locked it. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that mold creeping across the wall. I pictured it spreading over the patio floor, inch by inch, or seeping under the door. My rational mind told me this was just a fungus in a damp corner, but my instincts were screaming at me that something else was going on. My chest felt tight. I was breathing faster than normal. I forced myself to lie down and calm my heart rate. It felt like hours before I fell asleep. By the time the mold remediation team arrived, I was exhausted. 2 guys in uniform showed up with equipment: a chemical sprayer, protective gear, and a large industrial fan. They took one look at the corner and said it was a pretty bad infestation. I stepped aside and let them do their job. They scraped off a lot of the mold, applied a heavy-duty cleaner, and then used a fan to help dry out the area. They left after about an hour, telling me to keep an eye on it and let them know if it came back. They also said I might need better ventilation in the patio, but it was basically an enclosed space, so options were limited. That night I went to bed feeling more optimistic. The wall looked cleaner. The smell wasn't as bad. I actually slept until nearly 5 in the morning without interruption. Then I heard it again, a series of soft taps. I jumped out of bed, raced to the patio door, and turned on the light. The mold wasn't fully gone. A fresh patch was already creeping across the base of the wall. The air felt cold again. I stepped outside cautiously. My bare feet touched damp concrete. The humidity in that corner was back. I watched droplets of moisture forming along the newly cleaned surface. I stood there for a minute listening for movement. Nothing else happened. The tapping had stopped as soon as I opened the door. In the morning, I checked the camera footage. Corrupted again, right around the same time. I felt a sinking feeling in my gut. I started to doubt myself. Was I imagining things? Was my camera defective? I tried a different brand of camera, but the results stayed the same. Corrupted recordings after a few hours. No clear explanation. I considered sleeping in the living room with the sliding door open, just to keep an eye on that corner. But the thought of staring at that dark patch all night made my skin crawl. Instead, I tried to come up with a plan. First, I bought a motion-activated floodlight. I installed it on the patio ceiling so it would shine directly at the corner. If anything moved there at night, it would trigger a bright light. Setting it up took me a couple of hours. I tested it in the evening by waving my hand in the corner. It worked. A sudden beam of light illuminated the wall. Around 1 in the morning, I was still awake, scrolling on my phone, when I heard a pop from outside. Then the floodlight clicked on. I jumped up, grabbed a metal flashlight, and hurried to the sliding door. The floodlight was shining, but I didn't see movement. I opened the door and stepped out. The corner was lit up, and the mold glistened like black slime on the wall. The air stank of mildew. I looked around, walked up to the wall, and found nothing. No intruder. No animal. I stood there, feeling my heart race, listening. The floodlight turned off after a minute because there was no motion to keep it activated. I stood in the dark, only my flashlight shining on the damp wall. I heard a quiet sound behind me, like a raspy exhale. I spun around. The air was still. I saw no one, no thing. I backed away toward the door, refusing to turn my back on that corner. Then I went inside and locked the door. I could still feel my pulse thumping in my neck. Over the next few weeks, I tried everything. I used different cleaning solutions, placed a few dehumidifier packets in the corner, and even left a fan running outside. Nothing solved the moisture problem. The mold kept returning. Every few nights, I'd hear that tapping or scratching sound. Every few nights, something got moved in the corner. The camera kept failing to record. My neighbor upstairs stayed clueless. He claimed not to hear a thing. I called an electrician to check if there was some wiring behind the wall that could cause interference. There wasn't. The walls were just plain concrete. I had the plumber check for leaks. He didn't find any pipe issues. I started to dread nighttime. I stayed up late, wide awake in bed, waiting for the tapping. It never happened at the same time. Sometimes it was around midnight, sometimes as late as 3 or 4. But it always sounded the same, like a slow, deliberate tapping from the other side of the wall, followed by a faint scratching. My chest would tighten, and I'd feel cold sweat on my forehead. I couldn't relax. My mind raced with thoughts about something lurking out there. Each time I mustered the courage to step outside, the noise stopped. Every time I tried to catch it on camera, the footage got corrupted. At one point, I even considered selling the apartment. The idea of living with this bizarre, unsolved problem weighed on me, but I had just bought the place. The real estate market wasn't great, and I didn't want to explain to a potential buyer that there was something strange in the corner of the patio. So I stayed. I tried to keep things normal. I went to work, I cooked dinner, I watched TV, I scrolled through my phone. But my mind never fully let go of that nagging sense of unease. One night I decided to sit by the sliding glass door in the dark and just watch. My plan was to wait for the tapping, then flick on the floodlight manually. I sat there with a glass of water, breathing slowly, trying to stay calm. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the first faint tap. My heart pounded. I held my breath and listened. Another tap. Then something like a scratch or a drag. I flipped the switch for the floodlight and pressed my face to the glass. The corner lit up and I saw a slight movement across the wall. It was like the surface rippled, but maybe it was just water trickling down. I couldn't be sure. I stared for a good 20 seconds. The movement didn't repeat. My face was only inches from the glass and I felt a sense of panic. That corner looked wet, but nothing else was there. When the tapping stopped, I realized my hands were shaking. My mouth was dry. I was breathing heavily, and my chest felt tight. I sat there for a few more minutes before finally stepping away. I didn't sleep much that night. I live with this routine now. The mold is still there, no matter how many times I clean it. The camera keeps failing at night. The tapping and scraping continue. I keep hoping to catch someone sneaking in, but there's never anyone there. Sometimes I see fresh scratch marks on the concrete. Other times I find random objects moved around. I even tried leaving a big heavy plant pot in that corner, thinking it would be too heavy to move. One morning, I found it shifted an inch away from the wall. I can't say I've solved anything. I haven't seen a ghost or a person. I haven't found a physical explanation. All I know is that the corner is always damp and cold, and at night something happens there. I've tried to act tough about it, but it gets under my skin. Every time I hear that tapping, my heart jumps. Every time I see something moved, my stomach drops. So that's where things stand. I own this place. I can't afford to leave. I don't have any proof that something is actively breaking in. But I also don't have a normal explanation for these events. The mold remediation team said they might have to tear out a portion of the wall to really address the moisture source. That means more time, more money, and no guarantee it'll fix the strange night activity. But I might do it anyway just to see if something is hidden behind the wall. For now, I stay alert. I've got my floodlight, my camera, and my flashlight. I keep my phone charged in case I need to record anything. I try to tell myself it's probably just a weird moisture problem combined with my imagination. But deep down, I don't really believe that. I can't deny the things I've seen with my own eyes and heard with my own ears. Tonight, I'm going to try something new. I'm going to set my phone on a tripod, point it at that corner through the sliding glass door, and record straight to my cloud storage. If that fails too, I'll have to accept that there's something out there I can't explain. Either way, I'll keep trying to figure it out. I'll keep facing that dark, damp spot. I can't pretend it's not there. Whether it's mold or something worse, I'm living with it in my own backyard. If I ever get answers, I'll make sure to tell someone. But right now, I'm still in the dark, listening to those quiet taps on the other side of the wall.